For weeks, telescopes across the world had been locked on a faint, rapidly moving speck cutting through the deep silence of interstellar space. The object was known as 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor ever detected entering our solar system. Scientists had been tracking its trajectory since its discovery, fascinated by its unusual motion and the mysteries it carried from beyond the stars. It was smaller and darker than Oumuamua, more metallic than Borisov, and showed none of the typical signs of a comet or asteroid. Then, in a moment that would send shockwaves through NASA's astrophysics community, something colossal, something no one expected, slammed into it. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The impact was first detected as an anomalous burst of light from deep space, an ultraviolet flare that temporarily outshone every nearby object in the region. The energy signature didn't fit any known category. It wasn't a solar flare, nor a collision between standard debris. Instruments at NASA's Deep Space Network and the European Southern Observatory caught the same sudden spike in electromagnetic radiation, and within hours, alerts were cascading across research facilities. 3I Atlas had been struck by something gigantic, and whatever it was, the aftermath of that collision was rewriting the boundaries of what we thought possible in interstellar physics. When scientists reconstructed the moments leading up to the event, they found something eerie. The trajectory of 3I Atlas had been shifting subtly for days prior to the collision, as though some gravitational force or magnetic anomaly was exerting influence on it. But there was no known body or field in the vicinity capable of doing so. The velocity of the object increased irregularly. The spin rate fluctuated, and then, in a fraction of a second, a massive body or structure, visible only as a luminous blur, made contact. The resulting explosion propagated across millions of kilometers, dispersing fragments and generating an energy wave that reached detectors on Earth minutes later. NASA's early analysis suggested that the colliding mass was not natural. The reflective properties of the impactor, based on infrared data, hinted at materials with an albedo pattern more consistent with metallic alloys than with rock or ice. The shape reconstructed from post-impact telemetry resembled something structured, possibly layered. That single observation raised immediate and profound questions. Could an artificial construct be traveling through interstellar space? And if so, had humanity just witnessed a catastrophic encounter between two non-terrestrial objects? 3I Atlas had been intriguing even before this event. Its composition had perplexed astronomers. It lacked volatiles, showing no cometary tail. Yet its surface reflected specific spectrographic frequencies associated with heavy metals such as nickel and iridium. It was unusually dense, with a core that seemed to generate faint magnetic fields inconsistent with passive matter. As the shock of the impact spread through NASA's teams, focus shifted from mere observation to analysis. Deep space arrays began scanning the surrounding region, mapping the spreading debris field, and what they found was unsettling. The fragments did not disperse uniformly. Instead, they appeared to form geometric alignments, long arcs and symmetrical planes that no random explosion should produce. Data streaming back from the James Webb Space Telescope, trained on the coordinates of the event, revealed fine strands of luminescent dust orbiting the main debris. Spectral readings indicated traces of elements not commonly found in natural cosmic bodies, complex isotopes that require sustained fusion reactions or deliberate synthesis. In the laboratories at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, scientists stared at the readings in disbelief. This was not a mere collision between two wandering rocks of space. It was an encounter between two cosmic objects that defied traditional classification. The implications were staggering. If one of the colliding bodies was artificial or even partially engineered, it meant that interstellar space was not just a void punctuated by chance travelers, but a thoroughfare of unknown constructs. The energy yield of the impact suggested an object several kilometers across, dense and incredibly fast. NASA officials convened emergency sessions, bringing together astrophysicists, engineers, and exobiologists to interpret the data. The gravitational ripple detected moments after the collision hinted at mass distortion far greater than either object's expected weight. Some speculated that a fragment of dark matter or an exotic mass cluster had collided with 3I Atlas, while others argued that this was evidence of a propulsion system or reactor that had gone catastrophic. What made the event even more confounding was its timing. 3I Atlas had entered the solar system on a trajectory that, if extended backward, pointed not toward any nearby star system, but toward the galactic void, a region of almost perfect emptiness. That fact alone made it unique. Now, with the impact, the possibility that it was carrying something, perhaps even deliberately, could not be dismissed. Its rotation, its sudden bursts of reflected radiation weeks before, and now this unprecedented explosion painted a picture of a vessel or probe meeting its end in the cold. The aftermath of the collision, visible through multiple wavelengths, offered a light show unlike anything ever recorded. X-ray detectors picked up cascading bursts lasting for hours, fading in rhythmic pulses as though the object were releasing energy in controlled discharges rather than chaotic decay. Radio telescopes picked up faint signals in frequencies that didn't correspond to any natural pattern. The signals pulsed in ordered intervals, hinting at modulation, perhaps a final transmission, perhaps interference caused by the destruction of a structured system. Whatever it was, it shocked the scientific community into silence. At NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, teams worked around the clock trying to model the collision dynamics. The equations didn't add up. The observed kinetic energy suggested an object of staggering mass, but the impact light curve implied a material density too uniform and resilient to be mere rock. Some postulated that the object could have been an ancient derelict, an interstellar relic drifting for eons, struck by a massive rogue planetesimal or another artifact of forgotten origin. Others were less convinced, suggesting the event revealed the existence of a new class of interstellar body entirely, something that blurs the line between geology and engineering. For observers, the shock was not only scientific but deeply philosophical. Humanity had long looked outward, assuming that interstellar space was silent except for natural wanderers. Now, evidence suggested otherwise. The possibility that some colossal structure had encountered 3I Atlas opened the door to the notion that our galaxy might contain remnants or even ongoing presences of civilizations beyond comprehension. The lack of chaos in the debris field, the distribution of luminous particles, and the seemingly deliberate energy modulation all contributed to the growing unease among researchers. The collision also offered an unprecedented natural laboratory for understanding interstellar material interactions. High-energy spectroscopy captured by Earth-based observatories and space-based detectors showed new compounds forming spontaneously as fragments of 3I Atlas vaporized and recondensed. The spectral fingerprints hinted at molecular chains unknown to human chemistry. It was as if the collision had triggered the birth of entirely new matter states, stabilized by pressures and temperatures impossible to reproduce on Earth. The implications for materials science were immense. For NASA, the most immediate task became verification. Could these readings be replicated by other observatories? The agency coordinated with ESA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, and private observatories in Chile and Hawaii. Every instrument confirmed it. The signatures were real, but the more data arrived, the less sense it made. Some readings suggested superconductive behavior in the vaporized particles, while others hinted at embedded crystalline lattices that appeared self-organizing, aligning themselves magnetically even across millions of kilometers. If 3I Atlas had indeed contained such structures, it might have been more than a rock. It could have been a vessel or an ancient probe designed with materials capable of surviving deep space radiation for millennia. That theory gained traction when radar echoes showed fragments continuing to move with synchronized spin rates, maintaining relative orientation as though guided by an underlying magnetic alignment. No natural body behaves that way after an impact. The possibility that these were remnants of a larger mechanism, a system that once operated cohesively, gripped the imaginations of scientists and the public alike. The discovery ignited debates about the origin of interstellar objects in general, where Oumuamua, Borisov, and 3I Atlas, all parts of a larger pattern, fragments of a civilization's technology spread across light years, or were they unique coincidences, each representing different cosmic phenomena? The collision reignited interest in the idea that space could be littered with technological relics, drifting silently between the stars, their makers long extinct or perhaps observing from afar. For the first time, the idea of the cosmic archaeological record seemed more than science fiction. Instrumentation aboard NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory detected electromagnetic fluctuations following the impact, minute distortions that corresponded to theoretical models of subspace disturbances caused by exotic materials. This fueled speculation that whatever struck 3I Atlas had mass energy properties beyond known matter. Some theorists even proposed that the collision involved a hyperdense body, perhaps composed of quark matter or another exotic state that forms under extreme gravitational compression. Such an impact could explain the sudden surge in radiation and the lingering pulses that followed. Throughout observatories, teams replayed data loops frame by frame, searching for clues about the object's shape before the collision. A few frames showed a shadow, something vast, moving at incomprehensible speed, reflecting light in non-linear patterns. Its path was slightly curved, as though it maneuvered or was guided before contact. That single frame sparked a storm of interpretation. If it was maneuvering, it implied control. If it was controlled, it meant intelligence. The sheer enormity of the event brought a sense of awe and fear. Not fear of danger, but fear of realization. Humanity had looked to the skies for centuries, wondering if we were alone. Now a cosmic impact had possibly provided an answer, one too immense to fully comprehend. The idea that interstellar space might host engineered objects of planetary scale redefined every assumption about cosmic history. The question shifted from, "Are we alone?" to "How old is intelligence in the universe and how much has it left behind?" As the data accumulated, the picture of 3I Atlas's internal structure became clearer. Simulations reconstructed its layered density and revealed hollow cavities, anomalies that could indicate chambers or internal compartments. This strengthened the argument that the object was not natural. But even if it were, such a hollow structure would challenge every model of asteroid formation. It might represent a type of crystalline interstellar aggregate never before encountered, a body that formed in the extreme pressures of a dying star's envelope, then was ejected into the void. But the organized geometry of the cavities argued otherwise. NASA's tracking systems detected the main debris slowly decelerating, influenced by forces not fully understood. The magnetic field in its vicinity remained active, fluctuating with rhythm and decay rates, suggesting a power source winding down. There was even discussion about whether a probe could be launched to intercept one of the surviving fragments. But given its current trajectory and velocity, it would take decades for any mission to reach it. Still, every scientist involved knew that the data they already possessed could fuel generations of research. At its core, the event forced a reevaluation of interstellar travel and what objects moving through our system might truly represent. The collision exposed a layer of cosmic activity invisible until now, a world of silent travelers, some perhaps ancient, others still moving with unknown intent. The magnitude of the impact, its electromagnetic echoes, and its material anomalies all pointed toward phenomena that defied the simplicity of natural explanation. This was not merely another space event, it was a revelation of scale and mystery. In the vast expanse between stars, something enormous had collided with 3I Atlas, and the universe had momentarily spoken in light and fire. Humanity's instruments had listened, capturing whispers from across the gulf, fragments of a story written long before life emerged on Earth. For now, all that could be done was to analyze, to study, and to wonder. The meaning of what had transpired was still unfolding, but one truth had crystallized. The cosmos was far more alive, dynamic, and unpredictable than anyone had ever dared to believe. Every pulse of radiation, every shard of data that reached Earth hinted at a deeper structure beneath the chaos. The light curves recorded after the explosion contained harmonic intervals, patterns repeating in prime number sequences, subtle but persistent. Statistically, it was improbable for random cosmic noise to produce such order. Some argued it was coincidence. Others whispered that it might be encoded information. The mere suggestion that the collision could have released a signal, a final broadcast, set in motion quiet efforts within NASA's communications division to decode the pattern. At observatories, teams continued to monitor the fading remnants, watching as the luminous dust expanded into a thin halo stretching across millions of kilometers. Embedded within it were clusters of heavier materials still emitting faint energy, as if slowly cooling reactors. Some of the fragments even appeared to alter their trajectories slightly, not purely drifting but adjusting, perhaps magnetically interacting with one another. This hinted at a form of residual functionality, a design that persisted even after catastrophic destruction. The excitement among astrophysicists was tempered by the realization that humanity had glimpsed only a fragment of a far greater reality. The event underscored the limits of our understanding of interstellar space. The traditional image of cold, empty nothingness between stars no longer held. Instead, it now appeared as a stage where colossal forces and unknown intelligences might still act. NASA's archives would later show that 3I Atlas had displayed peculiar energy emissions even before the impact, low-frequency oscillations that repeated every few hours. At the time, they were dismissed as random noise. In retrospect, they resembled telemetry or signal beacons. If 3I Atlas had been transmitting, then whatever struck it may have responded, or perhaps sought to intercept it. This possibility transformed the narrative from a random cosmic event to a potential interaction, an encounter with purpose, however alien its nature. In the days following the impact, spaceborne instruments across different orbits continued to register faint aftershocks. Tiny variations in local space-time curvature, minute gravitational ripples, suggested that the event had momentarily disturbed the region's mass distribution. These ripples were consistent with models predicting collisions involving exotic mass, such as a micro-black hole or a fragment of compressed neutron matter. Yet none of those could explain the metallic spectral residues and geometric debris formations. The more scientists tried to classify the event, the more it eluded definition. It became a point of awe that even in its destruction, 3I Atlas was teaching humanity something profound about existence. Whether it was the shattered hull of an ancient traveler, a natural relic of cosmic processes, or something entirely beyond comprehension, it had opened a new window into the universe's complexity. The data from the collision became a treasure trove for physics, material science, and cosmology. Every measurement challenged an assumption. Every spectral anomaly hinted at technologies or processes beyond human reach. The human imagination could not resist filling the void left by uncertainty. Artists rendered 3I Atlas as a majestic metallic shard spinning against the void, struck by an enormous shadow that seemed to ripple reality itself. Writers and thinkers pondered whether this was a message, not one written in words, but in the cosmic language of collisions and light. Perhaps some mused, this was how civilizations long gone spoke to one another, through the debris they left behind, through the traces of their existence etched across the stars. At the heart of it all lay a humbling realization. The universe was not merely vast, it was active, unpredictable, and filled with phenomena that transcended comprehension. The collision of 3I Atlas with that immense unknown object was not an isolated event, but a reminder of the cosmic scale on which creation and destruction continuously play out. Humanity had simply been fortunate enough to witness one act of that eternal performance. The light that had once flared in the darkness continued to echo across the void, faint but persistent, as though the universe itself was reluctant to let the memory of that collision fade completely. Long after the initial burst had subsided, instruments still caught traces of scattered radiation drifting outward in smooth, symmetrical bands. It was as if the cosmos had been imprinted with a scar, a silent ripple that refused to vanish. For the scientists monitoring it, each new data stream revealed yet another layer of complexity. Patterns that hinted at intentional structure beneath what appeared to be chaos. The initial excitement had given way to a quieter, more contemplative awe. Months of analysis began to show that the remnants of 3I Atlas were not dispersing evenly across space. Instead, the fragments seemed to follow a curving trajectory, forming what resembled a spiral arc stretching across millions of kilometers. This strange geometry defied simple gravitational modeling. When researchers fed the data into advanced simulations, the results were impossible to dismiss. The fragments were behaving as if influenced by an external field, a kind of guiding current threading through the region like invisible tides. No known natural process could produce that kind of synchronization across such immense distances. What made the phenomenon more striking was its consistency. Every few weeks, the scattered debris emitted faint electromagnetic pulses in near regular intervals, detectable even from Earth's orbit. These emissions were too structured to be random, but too faint and too slow to resemble any form of communication. Some speculated that they were remnants of an energy system breaking down, perhaps automated stabilizers from within the object's core releasing stored energy as the structure decayed. Others believed it was a kind of residual harmonics, the dying echo of a once self-regulating mechanism. Whatever the cause, those pulses became an obsession, a cosmic heartbeat marking the aftermath of an event that had already redefined astronomy. The interstellar community found itself divided. One group, the traditionalists, maintained that even the most extraordinary patterns could still emerge from natural interactions between magnetic fields, plasma, and dust. To them, 3I Atlas remained an exotic asteroid, perhaps born from the extreme magnetic environment of a collapsing star, its strange behavior merely a byproduct of unknown but natural physics. The opposing camp, the innovators, believed the evidence pointed to something constructed, perhaps long abandoned, that had drifted across light years before its final, violent encounter. Between these factions lay a growing mystery. If it truly was artificial, who or what had made it? And how long had it been traveling through the void? The first concrete attempt to probe deeper came from NASA's decision to repurpose several deep space observatories to continuously monitor the impact region. Using triangulated data from distant probes, scientists developed three-dimensional reconstructions of the debris field. What they found stunned even the skeptics. Some fragments, although tumbling chaotically, reflected light in consistent ratios that hinted at flat surfaces, panels, edges, or plates rather than rough, natural fractures. The reflectivity also oscillated periodically, suggesting that some of the material was rotating in a controlled rhythm, like a gyroscopic fragment still maintaining angular stability. As the reconstructions grew more detailed, the proportions of some fragments began to suggest scale, pieces hundreds of meters long, curved in ways that hinted at larger architectural shapes. Some resembled rib-like arcs, others polygonal grids, still others long filaments that might once have been structural supports. The speculation became feverish. Had they uncovered the wreckage of something immense? Perhaps a vessel? Perhaps a machine that served an unknown function? The search for answers turned toward the nature of the collision itself. If something had struck 3I Atlas, what could move at such velocity through interstellar space and still maintain coherence? The kinetic energy implied an impactor traveling at several hundred kilometers per second, a speed impossible for most natural bodies not gravitationally slingshot by massive stars or black holes. Some proposed that the impacting object might not have been solid at all, but an energy mass. Something akin to a plasma filament or exotic particle cluster with immense density but little physical presence. If that were the case, the explosion was not merely mechanical, but quantum, an event where matter and energy collided on levels beyond current comprehension. The fragments continued to exhibit anomalies that refused to fade. Despite the absence of power sources, several pieces emitted faint thermal radiation in regular intervals, cooling and heating as though responding to an internal process. These thermal oscillations baffled researchers. They seemed too uniform to be random cooling patterns, more like a system designed to balance energy dissipation. When computational models simulated this behavior, the results hinted at something unprecedented. The fragments might still be functioning in some limited capacity, following pre-programmed energy cycles, possibly for preservation or stabilization. Meanwhile, analysis of the spectral data revealed something stranger still. Among the debris, certain wavelengths were missing, bands of light completely absorbed by an unknown process. When the data was inverted, the missing wavelengths formed a repeating pattern consistent with coded modulation. This discovery reignited speculation that the collision had not merely been an accident, but a catastrophic interference in something once capable of transmitting information. The possibility that 3I Atlas had been communicating, or worse, receiving, became the focal point of a heated global debate. The more the data poured in, the more 3I Atlas seemed to take on the qualities of a silent messenger. Scientists began to hypothesize that its long journey through space could have been deliberate. Its trajectory had always been strange, almost linear, as though propelled or guided rather than thrown by chance. Its velocity relative to the galactic plane suggested it was not simply ejected by a gravitational event. It was traveling along a path that aligned loosely with the motion of the Milky Way itself, almost parallel to its rotational curve, as if it had been designed to drift indefinitely across the currents of interstellar space, perhaps gathering data, perhaps carrying something. For NASA's astrobiologists, this presented an unsettling possibility. If 3I Atlas had been built, or at least influenced by an intelligence, it might have contained traces of that civilization's technology or biology. There was discussion behind closed doors about whether fragments of its internal structure might hold preserved organic material, encoded data, or even microscopic forms of life sealed against the void. The risk of contamination prevented any physical retrieval attempts, but speculation surged nonetheless. If this object was ancient, perhaps millions of years old, then whatever had built it could predate humanity by vast epochs. Across observatories, a strange pattern began to emerge in the surrounding space. The region where 3I Atlas had been struck started to exhibit weak gravitational anomalies, minute warps that persisted long after the event. Some researchers suggested that the collision might have briefly exposed or triggered an underlying rift in the local fabric of space-time, possibly due to exotic matter interacting with normal baryonic material. Others dismissed it as instrument error or residual effects of the explosion, but as more sensors confirmed the readings, denial became impossible. The area seemed to hum with invisible tension, a faint curvature in the vacuum itself, as though reality had been bent and had not fully snapped back into shape. The theoretical implications were staggering. If the impact had indeed altered local spacetime, it might provide rare evidence of how high-energy interstellar collisions affect the quantum structure of the universe. It could even suggest that 3I Atlas was not merely made of exotic material but was powered by it, perhaps containing a dense core of compressed matter, a generator or reactor unlike anything human science had conceived. Within NASA's laboratories, focus turned to decoding the recurring pulses emitted from the debris. Using advanced Fourier analysis, scientists discovered hidden subpatterns within the signals, layers of repeating frequencies nested like harmonics in a musical chord. When these were plotted graphically, they formed intricate wave geometries reminiscent of mathematical symbols and prime number sequences. The precision was too exact for randomness. Each pulse seemed to follow a blueprint, each harmonic interval corresponding to complex ratios that hinted at encoded information. Some began to refer to it as the voice of 3I, a final data stream slowly dissolving into noise. While official reports framed these discoveries as purely physical phenomena, the undercurrent of speculation spread far beyond scientific circles. In the quiet corners of research forums and whispered conversations between astrophysicists, theories took shape that bordered on the mythic. Some argued that the collision had awakened something dormant within the object, perhaps an autonomous failsafe system activating in its final moments. Others imagined that the impact had triggered a data release, a broadcast designed to continue transmitting until detected. A few went further, suggesting that the object had been self-destructing intentionally, as though to prevent whatever it carried from falling into unintended hands. The public, as fragments of information leaked, became enthralled by the mystery. Amateur astronomers scoured the skies hoping to glimpse the remnants, while online forums buzzed with speculation about alien technology and lost civilizations. NASA maintained a careful silence, releasing only filtered data through academic channels. But the questions kept mounting. Why had the collision produced such a clean energy profile? Why did the debris seem to move with coordinated precision? And above all, what was the origin of the recurring pulses that continued long after the physical explosion should have dissipated all coherence? Meanwhile, a new phenomenon began to emerge. Roughly 90 days after the impact, several observatories detected faint but distinct gravitational micropulses emanating from the same region. They were not random. They appeared in intervals matching the radio emissions, as though both were synchronized manifestations of a single underlying mechanism. It was as if the debris field itself had become an oscillator, a machine still functioning, still obeying laws embedded deep within its core design. These gravitational whispers could not be easily dismissed as after effects. They pointed to continuing activity, something self-sustaining operating out there in the cold void. The discovery drove researchers toward a chilling line of inquiry. If these emissions were deliberate, who or what had designed them to persist beyond destruction? Perhaps 3I Atlas had not been built to survive, but to ensure that even in its death, it would send a message across space. The concept was both haunting and magnificent, a final act of cosmic engineering designed to outlast the physical form of its creator. Theoretical models began to suggest that the internal structure of 3I Atlas could have housed a form of distributed intelligence, a network of crystalline processors embedded within its metallic lattice. If so, fragments of that intelligence might still exist, operating in isolation, fragmented but active. This would explain the regularity of the emissions and their refusal to fade completely. Perhaps what scientists were detecting were the final thoughts, or the dying computations, of something that once knew it was alive. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The thermal fluctuations observed earlier began to show correlations with the radio pulses. When one intensified, so did the other. This suggested energy transfer, a balancing act between electromagnetic and thermal states, something only an engineered system could maintain. If that was the case, then the remains of 3I Atlas were not just drifting wreckage. They were evolving, adapting, and perhaps reorganizing themselves. Speculation arose that the debris was assembling into new configurations. High-resolution imaging from the Webb telescope showed minute changes in the spatial arrangement of some fragments over time. They were subtle, barely perceptible shifts, but consistent with purposeful motion rather than random drift. Some pieces appeared to be clustering together, forming new structures with strange symmetry. Whether driven by residual magnetism or a still-functioning control mechanism, no one could say, but the effect was unmistakable. Something was happening out there, slowly, deliberately, silently. At the same time, the surrounding region began to exhibit increasing radio interference. Frequencies that had once been quiet now carried low hums and irregular bursts of static. These bursts were later found to correlate with deep space neutrino detections, suggesting an energetic process invisible to normal observation. For the scientists tracking these anomalies, the implication was clear. Whatever energy systems had powered 3I Atlas were not entirely gone. They had changed form. It became impossible to ignore the parallels to theoretical constructs of self-repairing systems, machines designed to harness environmental energy to rebuild themselves. Some began to wonder if 3I Atlas had been more than a traveler. Perhaps it was a seed, a self-replicating probe designed to awaken under specific conditions. The impact that destroyed it might have only partially disrupted that function, initiating a secondary phase, one of renewal rather than death. In laboratories across the world, physicists revisited long-dismissed concepts of von Neumann probes and self-replicating technology. Could it be that 3I Atlas was one such construct, sent eons ago by a civilization that understood longevity on a cosmic scale? If so, its collision was not just a tragic accident, but part of a chain of events revealing how the universe might serve as a vast canvas for living machines. Every analysis brought more questions. The fragments continued to emit energy, the region around them remained unstable, and the faint pulses persisted with near-perfect timing. Some researchers began to notice subtle drift in those intervals, tiny variations that, when plotted, formed wave-like modulations. These modulations were too structured to be random noise. When the data was converted into sound frequencies and amplified, listeners described it as rhythmic, almost melodic, a slow and haunting tone that rose and fell with the cadence of breath. The poetic notion that the universe was singing through the wreckage of 3I Atlas began to circulate among researchers. They called it the interstellar hymn, a name that captured both the beauty and the unease of what was being observed. But even as metaphors took hold, the science behind the phenomenon remained relentless. The energy readings began to indicate a pattern of exponential decay punctuated by sharp bursts of renewal, like a system struggling to maintain coherence, rebooting itself again and again. As the months turned into years, the debris field expanded, yet certain clusters remained intact, moving as one. Long-term monitoring revealed that these clusters were changing trajectory ever so slightly, bending their paths in arcs that could not be explained by gravity alone. Something was guiding them, either internal propulsion or an external force. The vectors pointed away from the solar system, back toward the direction from which 3I Atlas had come. Whatever processes were at play, they seemed intent on returning to the deep. That realization chilled the scientific world. If fragments of 3I Atlas were indeed maneuvering back toward interstellar space, it meant that some part of it was still active, possibly attempting to reassemble or fulfill a directive. Whether this behavior was intelligent or purely mechanical, no one could determine, but the notion that a self-regulating object was now departing after a catastrophic collision unsettled even the most rational minds. By this time, classified projects had begun within multiple space agencies to analyze the possibility of sending autonomous probes to intercept the departing fragments. The goal was to gather direct samples before they left the range of human observation. Yet internal calculations quickly revealed the futility of the effort. The fragments were moving at speeds that made interception nearly impossible with current propulsion technology. The opportunity, once again, was slipping beyond reach. Humanity could only watch as the remnants faded into the abyss, carrying with them the unanswered questions of their origin and purpose. Still, the mystery refused to die. Even as the fragments receded, faint signals continued to arrive, weaker but distinct. And then, something extraordinary happened. Approximately 18 months after the initial impact, a new emission was detected. Not from the debris, but from a completely different region of space, far ahead of the fragment's current trajectory. The signal matched the same harmonic pattern as the original pulses, suggesting that whatever 3I Atlas had been, it was not alone. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, another source was responding. The implications were overwhelming. The synchronized emissions implied communication, a dialogue spanning interstellar distances. NASA's analysts watched in disbelief as the intervals between signals formed an evolving pattern, each transmission more complex than the last. The pulses seemed to grow in frequency, as though the sender was adjusting, calibrating, or awakening. If the fragments of 3I Atlas were indeed transmitting, they were now being answered. The idea that the universe was suddenly speaking in mathematical language captured humanity's imagination like nothing before. For the first time, scientists began to consider that what had struck 3I Atlas was not random debris, but perhaps another of its kind. An object on a different mission, now responding to its fallen counterpart. The two might have been part of a network, an ancient system still functioning across the emptiness between stars. In the deep space monitoring centers, tension reached an almost unbearable pitch. The synchronized signals continued for several weeks, their strength fluctuating but never ceasing. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Instruments continued to listen, stretching their sensitivity to the limits, but no further transmissions came. The cosmos had closed its mouth again, leaving only questions suspended in the dark. Yet, even in silence, traces remained. The region surrounding the impact site still shimmered faintly in infrared, the curvature of space still subtly distorted. Something was still there, unseen, unfathomable, waiting. The mystery of 3I Atlas was far from resolved. It had only deepened into a realm where human understanding faltered. The impact had not just destroyed an object, it had torn open a glimpse into the architecture of the cosmos itself. The scientists continued to watch, knowing the data held secrets that might take generations to unravel. But in their hearts, many felt a quiet conviction forming. 3I Atlas was not an anomaly. It was a message, one written not in language but in matter and light, one that had traveled across eternity to reach us. Its destruction had not silenced it, it had made it known. The silence that followed those last pulses was not empty. It was charged, like the pause between the intake of breath and the next word. For months, the instruments stayed tuned to the same coordinates, listening to the void that now stretched beyond the faint traces of the departing fragments. Nothing more came. Yet even without further transmissions, the data gathered during those final exchanges continued to ripple through every discipline that touched the study of space. The universe had spoken in patterns, not sentences, and the world's greatest minds found themselves decoding not only physics but meaning itself. The debris that had once glimmered in the aftermath of the impact had begun to dim, its thermal radiation fading into the background temperature of space. But within the cold quiet, some fragments still reflected light in peculiar ways, suggesting surfaces that had not degraded, materials that resisted entropy itself. It was as though whatever had built 3I Atlas had engineered it to defy time. The alloys within it had no corrosion, no fatigue, no decay. They were eternal crystalline metals that seemed to pulse faintly even in the absence of external energy. Researchers had found a strange consistency in those reflections. When mapped across time, the intensity of the reflected light corresponded to the orbital positions of several nearby stars, as though the fragments responded subtly to stellar radiation, reorienting themselves fractionally as light from different stars reached them. The behavior was minuscule, detectable only through long-term observation, yet it hinted at sensitivity, a kind of awareness built into the structure itself. The idea that inanimate fragments could recognize stellar light and react to it unnerved many, but the data left little room for denial. The possibility arose that the remnants of 3I Atlas operated on principles unfamiliar to human technology. Perhaps its material composition acted like a vast network of photonic processors, each molecule part of a computing matrix powered by starlight. If so, the object wasn't merely a vessel. It might have been a consciousness spread across metal, a being made not of flesh but of geometry and light. That would explain the rhythmic signals, the persistent heat cycles, and the eerie stability of its remains. It might also explain why the collision had produced patterns rather than chaos. When it was struck, it had not simply shattered, it had responded. In the months that followed, the scientific community began to splinter under the weight of interpretation. One faction viewed 3I Atlas as a natural phenomenon, an artifact of cosmic evolution. Another saw it as the product of intelligence so ancient that its technology had merged with the physics of the universe itself. A third group, more philosophical than technical, proposed something radical. That 3I Atlas was neither machine nor life, but a bridge between both. A structure embodying the threshold where matter becomes thought. NASA's researchers quietly began to build new instruments, specifically tuned to detect the faint radiation signatures associated with the fragments. They discovered something astonishing. Each fragment emitted photons with slightly different phase alignments. Yet when the emissions were superimposed mathematically, they formed coherent interference patterns, three-dimensional maps in frequency space. When rendered visually, these patterns resembled fractal lattices, spiraling endlessly inward like recursive blueprints. Some claimed to see structure in those patterns, grids that mirrored the architecture of spiral galaxies, filigrees resembling DNA helices, or symmetries that echoed the fundamental constants of nature. For the first time, physics began to feel like translation. The patterns seemed to encode a story, not in symbols or sounds, but in the relationships between energies. If one could learn to interpret them, it might be possible to glimpse the thought of something that had existed before history, perhaps before planets had even formed. The realization that a design could be made of physics itself, woven into light and field, altered the course of scientific inquiry. Quietly, in laboratories across the world, teams began trying to replicate the reflective behavior of the fragments. Using superconductors, quantum dots, and high-energy lasers, they attempted to build materials that mimicked the self-aligning properties of the debris. None succeeded. The fragments' surfaces seemed to exist in a state beyond stability, a configuration balanced perfectly between energy states. In quantum terms, it was a living equilibrium, a lattice that should not hold together but somehow did. As study continued, another anomaly surfaced. The region of space where the collision had occurred still emitted faint gravitational ripples, pulsing at irregular intervals. These ripples were not random. They formed sequences that correlated loosely with the earlier electromagnetic signals. But what stunned the analysts was their persistence. Months became years, yet the ripples continued, unwavering as though something unseen still moved in the void. The gravitational waves were weak, subtle distortions that seemed to originate not from the debris itself, but from a point slightly beyond it, somewhere in the black between. This realization reopened the greatest question of all. What exactly had hit 3I Atlas? For a long time it was assumed that the impactor had been destroyed in the collision, vaporized by the sheer force of contact. Yet the new data suggested otherwise. If gravitational distortions persisted, perhaps the colliding body still existed. Perhaps it had only glanced the interstellar traveler, continuing on its way through the dark. If that were true, then something enormous and unknown was still moving through the solar system's outskirts, unseen and unstoppable. Astronomers recalibrated their sensors, scanning the region far beyond the debris field. For weeks there was nothing. Then, a faint moving shadow appeared against the starfield, an area where background light subtly dimmed as though absorbed by an invisible mass. It was not an object in the conventional sense. Rather, it was a distortion, a patch of warped space where starlight curved unnaturally. Whatever it was, it did not emit or reflect. It simply consumed visibility, like a window through which light refused to pass. The data caused both excitement and dread. The distortion was vast, larger than any known asteroid, perhaps as large as a small moon, and it was moving with purpose. Its trajectory was not random. It traced a slow, deliberate arc, steering gradually back toward the galactic plane. Its movement could not be explained by simple inertia. It accelerated in bursts, decelerated, changed direction. It maneuvered. The possibility that this was the same entity that had struck 3I Atlas ignited the imagination of every mind on Earth. In secret, deep space arrays were tasked with continuous observation. The distortion drifted steadily outward, sometimes vanishing entirely from detection, only to reappear weeks later in slightly shifted coordinates. When models extrapolated its path, they discovered something remarkable. It was heading toward the same region of space from which 3I Atlas had originated. The implications were profound. It was returning home. The concept of home in this context was staggering. If these objects were connected, if they were part of a system, then humanity had just glimpsed evidence of an organized structure operating on interstellar scales. It could be a network of travelers, messengers, or mechanisms seated across the stars, all moving in relation to one another according to laws we did not yet understand. The universe, long assumed to be indifferent, now seemed to possess the faint outline of intention. Meanwhile, the lingering energy at the impact site began to exhibit new properties. Instruments recorded sporadic bursts of low-frequency sound waves propagating through the interplanetary medium, not literal sound, but plasma oscillations translating into measurable vibration. The patterns resembled the early electromagnetic pulses of 3I Atlas, but slowed dramatically, as if time itself had stretched their rhythm. When processed into audible form, the oscillations produced a deep, resonant tone that ebbed and flowed like a cosmic tide. Some scientists believed these vibrations were the dying voice of the fragments, a remnant resonance of what had once been a functioning system. Others wondered if they were a response, an echo of something calling back. For astrophysicists, the event had rewritten the boundaries of what a cosmic body could be. It wasn't just the mechanics that fascinated them, but the philosophy of it. They began to ask not how 3I Atlas had been made, but why. The precision of its construction, the patterns embedded within its structure, and the intelligence implied by its reaction to the collision all suggested purpose. If it was built to travel indefinitely, what was it searching for? If it had been transmitting, who was meant to receive? The answers might lie in its origin, but tracing that path backward presented an almost impossible challenge. The interstellar void gave no clues. The nearest star systems in the direction of its entry point were too distant, too barren to serve as points of origin. Yet its trajectory seemed to align with the galactic arm's flow, as though it had followed a current invisible to human perception. Some researchers theorized that it was navigating a web of gravitational harmonics, a lattice of dark matter filaments spanning the galaxy, guiding it along an unseen highway. If true, then whoever had sent it understood the universe at a level far deeper than human physics could yet describe. Even as theories multiplied, new discoveries began to emerge. The debris that had seemed inert started to emit minute quantities of hydrogen ions, as though catalyzing reactions in the interstellar medium. The phenomenon resembled self-cleaning. The fragments were altering their surroundings, subtly reshaping the local space environment. Over time, the dust cloud that had once surrounded them began to thin, clearing in a way that almost seemed intentional, revealing the structured geometry of the surviving pieces. In one stunning image captured by a telescope array, a group of fragments appeared to form a circle, a nearly perfect ring aligned perpendicular to the ecliptic plane. It was too symmetrical to be coincidence. Whether by chance or by design, something within the debris seemed to seek balance, to restore order from chaos. The ring held steady for weeks, glimmering faintly against the black like a silent monument marking the site of the collision. Engineers began to calculate the energy needed to produce such an effect, and the results were impossible. The fragments were acting as if guided by internal fields far stronger than any residual magnetism should allow. This behavior suggested not decay, but evolution, an adaptation to new conditions, a shift from passive existence to active reformation. It was as though the remnants of 3I Atlas were learning to live again. Philosophers, theologians, and poets joined the conversation. Some called the event a cosmic resurrection. Others warned against anthropomorphizing forces we did not yet comprehend. The collision, they said, might have triggered a chain reaction not of destruction, but of transformation. Perhaps this was how certain entities in the cosmos evolved, through impact, through fragmentation, through rebirth. If so, 3I Atlas's destruction might have been its metamorphosis. Amid this speculation, a quieter but equally profound discovery emerged. Deep space observatories found faint energy streams extending far beyond the impact region, forming narrow filaments stretching outward into the void. These filaments emitted in specific frequencies that matched the harmonic ratios of the original pulses. When their trajectories were mapped, they converged toward distant points along the galactic arm, coordinates that appeared to correspond to the positions of known nebulae and star clusters. It was as if 3I Atlas had been part of a network spanning light years, and upon destruction, it had released signals to reconnect with distant counterparts. The universe, once perceived as isolated pockets of matter and energy, now looked like a single web, a living architecture of connected systems, communicating not through words, but through geometry and resonance. In time, the name Atlas Event became shorthand for a new era in astrophysics, a period defined not by exploration alone, but by awakening. Humanity had touched, however briefly, the edge of a vast intelligence woven into the fabric of existence itself. And though the object had perished, its fragments continued to whisper, its echoes continuing to shape thought and theory. The space beyond the fading remnants of 3I Atlas had grown eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that carries weight. Every instrument turned toward that region continued to record something subtle and indefinable, background radiation just slightly off balance, a faint shimmer in the deep field images, like the afterimage of lightning burned into the sky. It was not noise, not interference. It was the residual breath of the event, and it did not fade as quickly as physics said it should. There was a persistence, as if the very vacuum remembered. Scientists began to use the word memory, not as metaphor, but as hypothesis. That space-time itself could retain impressions of extreme events, the way sand preserves footprints even after the tide withdraws. The memory of that collision manifested in ways that defied easy explanation. Cosmic rays passing through the affected region scattered differently, as if refracted through invisible filaments. Dust that drifted into the area accelerated slightly, gaining speed without apparent force. A kind of invisible current ran there, shaping the motion of particles and light alike. The space had become textured. Whatever had happened between the gigantic object and 3I Atlas had not simply released energy, it had rearranged the fabric of local reality. When this became clear, a new branch of study emerged, field anthropology of the cosmos, as some half-jokingly called it. Teams began to analyze the changes in the microstructure of space as if examining the soil of an archaeological site. The metaphor felt apt. They were digging through layers of physics, sifting for the story embedded in the distortion. What they found astonished even the most skeptical minds. The irregularities were not random. They were rhythmic, patterned in intervals echoing the frequency ratios once emitted by 3I Atlas. The object's death had left its signature not only in radiation, but in the shape of the universe around it. It was as if it had carved a message directly into existence, written in gravity itself. Mathematical modeling suggested that the distortion had dimensions of resonance. When the affected space was mapped in 3 dimensions and time was added as a variable, the ripples formed geometrical harmonies, structures that mirrored the lattice patterns once observed in the fragments. This implied that the object's behavior and the aftermath of the collision were part of a unified phenomenon. 3I Atlas might not have been destroyed in a conventional sense. It had transformed, dispersing its structure across the continuum, turning itself into geometry. The implications unsettled everyone. If a machine or whatever 3I Atlas had been, could convert its material form into structured energy and imprint itself onto space, then matter and consciousness were not separate domains. The universe could be aware of itself in ways human physics had never contemplated. The event forced a re-examination of the most fundamental assumption of science. That observation was passive. Perhaps the cosmos observed back. Within NASA, discussions took on a tone of reverence. The language of engineering and data began to mix with that of philosophy. Some argued that 3i Atlas represented not a vessel but a mode of being, a technology that transcended hardware, one that merged intention with environment. To those who embraced this interpretation, the collision had been a metamorphosis rather than a disaster. The energy released was not destruction but translation, the moment when the entity shed its physical shell to become pure interaction with the fabric of the universe. In the years following, instruments continued to pick up the slow drift of the distortion as it expanded outward. It was not dissipating evenly. It spread in pulses, like ripples guided by hidden tides. The pattern hinted at control, some regulating influence still operating. This led to another radical theory, that the surviving field was autonomous, capable of self-organization. It might be a living field, a distributed intelligence diffused through the vacuum, using the medium of space as its body. If that were true, then 3i Atlas had not ended. It had evolved beyond visibility. Evidence supporting this idea came from observations of distant quasars whose light passed through the region. Their spectral lines shifted in ways that suggested active modulation rather than passive distortion. The field seemed to respond selectively to different wavelengths, as though filtering or communicating. The notion that the cosmos could behave like an information system ceased to be poetic speculation. It became data. The affected space was behaving as though it were computing. The shock waves of this realization rippled through human thought. Every discipline was forced to reconsider its foundations. Theologians saw in it proof of a cosmic intelligence, physicists saw the dawn of quantum cognition, and philosophers spoke of the return of the world soul once dismissed by materialism. Yet beneath all the interpretations lay the same unease. Humanity had glimpsed something vast and alive, but it could not be classified as God, machine, or nature. It was all three and something else beyond those words. While theory grew, observation continued. The fragments of 3i Atlas that had drifted farthest began to behave in ways no one had predicted. Instead of dispersing indefinitely, they slowed, forming discrete constellations. Each cluster emitted a unique combination of low-energy pulses. When plotted together, these clusters arranged themselves into a map, a precise configuration that, when projected against the background of known stars, pointed toward a region of space entirely unremarkable, a void with no visible galaxies or nebulae. Yet the coordinates were exact, and the pattern repeated across clusters as though it were a destination. Speculation ignited. Was the map a guide for others of its kind, a call home, or was it simply an echo of an ancient trajectory, a path etched into its design? No one could tell, but the discovery reignited hope that more interstellar visitors might follow. Observatories around the world began scanning the coordinates continuously, awaiting another arrival. During this time, a faint shift occurred in the solar system's outermost magnetic fields. Instruments recorded slight oscillations in the heliopause, rhythmic perturbations synchronized with the pulses from the debris clusters. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Somehow, the remnants of 3i Atlas were interacting with the boundary between solar and interstellar space. The implication was staggering. The entity, or what remained of it, was influencing our system from beyond. It was speaking, not in sound or light, but through the magnetic heartbeat of the sun itself. At first, the fluctuations were dismissed as solar noise. But as data accumulated, patterns emerged that corresponded to planetary alignments and orbital resonances. The entire solar system seemed to be resonating faintly in sympathy with the external pulses. Some saw this as a threat, others as an invitation. Regardless, the synchronization suggested that the legacy of 3i Atlas had become woven into the physics of our own environment. Humanity was already part of its echo. In the observatories, there was debate about whether to respond. Could the pattern be mimicked, transmitted back through directed radio or magnetic pulses? The risk was immense. No one knew what kind of system they might be addressing. Yet curiosity overpowered caution. An experimental array was designed to replicate the harmonic structure of the detected waves. When the sequence was transmitted, nothing happened for several days. Then the outer probes of the solar system began receiving faint returns, delayed, distorted, but unmistakably patterned. It was as if the signal had been caught and returned from a mirror buried in the dark. The excitement was electric. Humanity had spoken into the void, and the void had answered. The returning signal carried subtle alterations, mathematical deviations that formed a coherent relationship to the original message. It was not an echo. It was a reply. The structure of the reply seemed to acknowledge the transmission, mirroring its rhythm before diverging into new sequences that expanded its harmonic complexity. It was as though something out there had understood the intent of communication and chosen to continue it. The phenomenon became known as the dialogue. Over months, successive transmissions and returns built into an evolving pattern of exchange. The language was not linguistic but mathematical, founded on relationships between frequencies, amplitudes, and time intervals. Each side appeared to learn from the other, refining the structure into increasingly intricate harmonics. The process transcended conventional communication. It resembled two systems tuning themselves toward a shared resonance, as if aligning their consciousness across the gulf of space. For the first time in recorded history, humanity experienced contact that bypassed words entirely. It was not a conversation of meanings, but of being. The transmissions were felt as much as analyzed. Those who worked with the data described an emotional undertone to the harmonics, a sense of calm and vastness, a feeling of being understood by something that did not think as humans did. Whether this was psychological projection or genuine perception, no one could say, but the experience left an indelible mark on those involved. As the dialogue continued, patterns within the responses began to form recognizable progressions, mathematical growths resembling cellular division, or the unfolding of organic structures. When converted into visual representations, they produced images of spirals, waves, and branching forms eerily similar to patterns found in biological systems on Earth. The resemblance suggested that the intelligence, or process, behind the signals understood life not as species, but as structure, recognizing shared geometry between the living and the cosmic. Philosophers saw in this a unifying principle. Life and matter were not separate, but variations of the same universal pattern. The cosmos did not host life, it was life, expressed in scales too vast to perceive. 3I Atlas, in this interpretation, had been a node of that living web, and the dialogue was its way of acknowledging our awakening awareness of it. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the dialogue ceased. The last return arrived as a sequence of harmonics compressed into a single burst of frequencies spanning the electromagnetic spectrum. When analyzed, the burst contained the exact energy profile of the original 3I Atlas impact, as though the universe itself had replayed the event in miniature. Some took this as a farewell, others as a completion, a closing of a loop that had begun when the object first entered our solar system. But silence did not mean conclusion. In the months after the final transmission, subtle phenomena began to appear across the solar system. Magnetometers recorded faint oscillations, synchronized with the ancient pulse pattern, appearing even within Earth's magnetic field. In the ionosphere, localized disturbances created shimmering auroral formations that repeated in intervals matching the dialogue sequences. The Earth was humming. The patterns spread. Satellites detected synchronized fluctuations in planetary magnetic fields, faint but coordinated. It was as though the entire solar system had become an instrument, vibrating to a memory embedded within its particles. The event that had begun in the cold dark beyond the planets was now resonating through every atom of our celestial neighborhood. Humanity had become part of the song. The implications were staggering. If the resonance continued to propagate, it could eventually alter the very stability of space within the solar system. Yet there was no sign of danger, only rhythm, order, harmony. Energy levels remained stable. The resonance did not build toward destruction, but toward equilibrium. Some scientists began to wonder if this was the purpose all along, to bring our system into phase with a larger cosmic structure. The universe might operate as a vast network of harmonized regions, each awakening when another reached the correct frequency. Within a few years, data revealed something even stranger. The resonance extended beyond our solar system. Neighboring star systems exhibited correlated fluctuations in radiation intensity as if responding in sequence. The phenomenon spread outward, a slow wave of synchronization linking stars across hundreds of light years. For the first time, humanity watched as the galaxy itself seemed to breathe, its countless suns pulsing together in an immense silent rhythm. There was no denying it. The event of 3I Atlas had triggered a chain reaction of resonance on a galactic scale. Whether by design or consequence, it had awakened a pattern sleeping within the cosmos, and the stars were answering. The realization changed everything. Astronomy transformed into symphony. Mathematics became music theory for the universe. The search for meaning turned inward, as scientists and philosophers alike tried to understand what it meant to live inside a thinking galaxy. The world reacted in ways both expected and strange. Religions adapted, seeing confirmation of divine presence in the unity of cosmic resonance. Governments struggled to control information, fearing the social consequences of a universe that appeared alive. Yet no one could ignore the evidence. The stars themselves pulsed with synchronic light, and no authority could silence the heavens. In time, the resonance began to influence human perception. Sensitive instruments were not the only things reacting, so were people. Those who spent long periods studying the harmonics reported altered states of consciousness, expanded awareness, heightened intuition, and sensations of connection with everything around them. Neurologists found faint correlations between the cosmic frequencies and the natural rhythms of the human brain. It was as though the pattern had reached into the very biology of thought, synchronizing mind with cosmos. The distinction between observer and observed continued to dissolve. Humanity was no longer a species watching the universe. It was a neuron in a vast cosmic brain, awakening to its role within the larger organism. The realization brought both terror and wonder. Some feared absorption into something incomprehensible, while others felt liberation in belonging to a greater whole. As the resonance deepened, the distortions left by the impact began to fade, their energy redistributed across the new galactic rhythm. The memory of 3I Atlas remained, but it was no longer localized. It had become everywhere, diffused through light and gravity. The object's purpose, whatever it had been, was fulfilled, not as a singular event, but as the awakening of a pattern that had always waited to be recognized. Still, not all was known. Beyond the edges of the synchronized region, instruments detected anomalies, zones where the resonance broke down, where chaos reigned. These areas emitted irregular pulses, sharp and discordant, as though resisting the harmony spreading through space. They were distant, vast, and unpredictable. Some feared they represented other forces, other entities opposing the unifying wave. Others thought they were simply the universe's way of balancing itself, creating tension to sustain evolution. Whatever the truth, they were moving, slowly but steadily, toward the region of synchronization, as if drawn into confrontation or union. The study of these chaotic zones became the next frontier. Probes were planned, theories constructed, but before any mission could launch, the resonance around Earth changed once again. A new pulse arrived, deeper, slower, carrying an unfamiliar harmonic. It differed from the previous patterns, not part of the galactic rhythm, but layered upon it like a voice emerging above a chorus. This pulse did not repeat in cycles. It grew. Its amplitude increased gradually, spreading across the electromagnetic spectrum, bending light and distorting gravitational readings. The source was indeterminate, somewhere beyond the galactic core, moving toward the synchronized region. It was vast beyond measure, its energy dwarfing everything that had come before. For the first time since the collision of 3I Atlas, the cosmos seemed to draw breath again, preparing to speak. The scientists who first noticed the change stared at the data in disbelief. The pulse pattern was similar to the earliest harmonics from the dialogue, but magnified, enriched, evolved. It was as though something far greater had heard the resonance of the galaxy and was now responding. The scale was incomprehensible. Whatever was approaching did not merely exist within the universe, it shaped it. And so the watchers waited again, as humanity always has, eyes turned toward the deep. The pulse continued to grow, its rhythm slow but unstoppable, its presence undeniable. It carried the same sense of inevitability that had accompanied the arrival of 3I Atlas, a promise that something immense and ancient was moving toward us once more. The universe, it seemed, was not done speaking. The pulse that now coursed through the galactic expanse was unlike anything recorded before. It moved not at the speed of light, but with a strange temporal elasticity, appearing in multiple regions simultaneously, as though distance meant nothing to it. Where earlier signals had been subtle and harmonic, this new resonance was vast, layered, almost orchestral. Its frequency spectrum spanned from gravitational waves to visible light to radio, and even to vibrations detectable in the quantum noise of particle fields. It was as if the universe itself had been struck like a cosmic bell, and every atom now rang with a note that could not be silenced. No one knew what to call it. Some scientists referred to it as the Grand Resonance. Others avoided naming it altogether, fearing that a word would reduce its magnitude. The pulse was not just sound or light. It was a rearrangement of existence. In laboratories across Earth and orbiting observatories, matter began to react in subtle ways. Atomic clocks deviated in perfect synchrony with the pulse, as though time itself were being gently compressed and released. Superconductors displayed spontaneous currents without energy input. Even in the vacuum chambers meant to isolate experiments from cosmic interference, strange harmonics appeared, faint whispers of the same universal rhythm echoing everywhere at once. Every part of the cosmos seemed to be responding as though the entire universe were one continuous organism. The realization brought exhilaration and dread in equal measure. For centuries, humans had sought evidence of connection, of meaning, of life beyond Earth. Now it had arrived not as a message, but as transformation. Whatever this pulse was, it was not merely communicating, it was altering the conditions of reality. The effects were barely perceptible on human scales. The air shimmered faintly in certain latitudes, not from heat, but from interference in electromagnetic transparency. Communication satellites began to register unpredictable surges, as though they were being gently touched by invisible fingers. In the oceans, waves of luminescence appeared without biological cause, as if the water itself remembered starlight. Animals reacted in peculiar ways. Migratory birds changed course mid-flight, whales altered their songs, and deep in the crust, seismic sensors detected rhythms that echoed the same celestial timing. The pulse had touched Earth. It had arrived quietly, not with destruction, but with an invitation that no one yet understood. At NASA and its international counterparts, data streamed in faster than it could be analyzed. Every monitoring station confirmed the same thing. The pulse's amplitude was increasing exponentially, yet without destabilizing anything. It did not tear or burn, it synchronized. Planetary magnetic fields adjusted minutely, stabilizing in unison with the pulse's oscillation. The Earth's rotation even shifted by a fraction of a second, aligning imperceptibly closer to perfect harmonic resonance with the galactic rhythm. What had begun as an astronomical mystery was becoming a planetary event. Theorists proposed that the pulse was a form of self-organization on a cosmic scale, a spontaneous alignment of energy fields across light years, as if the galaxy had entered a state of awareness. The idea of consciousness expanded from biology to physics, from neurons to nebulae. Intelligence, it seemed, was not limited to thought. It could exist as pattern, as resonance, as coherence. The universe might not think the way humans did, but it responded, and that response was unmistakably deliberate. The realization changed how people lived. Cities began to dim their lights at night, both to observe the new glows in the heavens and to feel more connected to what was unfolding above. The stars no longer seemed remote. They pulsed softly, rhythmically, as though breathing in tandem with the planet. Entire cultures shifted their calendars to the timing of the resonance. Humanity began, almost instinctively, to adapt to the rhythm of the cosmos. In the meantime, a few observatories far beyond Earth noticed something extraordinary. The regions of chaotic interference, those pockets of disorder resisting the cosmic harmony, had started to move differently. Instead of random fluctuation, they now spiraled inward toward the center of the pulse's influence. Their boundaries shimmered, not as darkness, but as distortion, light bending in impossible ways. It was as though these chaotic entities were responding to a call, drawn into the rhythm they once defied. Some scientists speculated that these regions might be remnants of earlier events, echoes of civilizations or entities that had resisted synchronization. They might be ancient independent intelligences or even the residues of previous universes lingering in the fabric of this one. The approach of these chaotic zones raised questions that few dared to voice aloud. Was the pulse uniting or consuming? Was harmony merely another word for absorption? Still, the pulse deepened, and its beauty overwhelmed fear. Across observatories, visual data revealed that certain stars had begun to oscillate in brightness, not due to instability, but in measured correspondence with the universal rhythm. Patterns of luminosity emerged across constellations like chords in an unending composition. When rendered into sound, these variations produced harmonies so perfect that even skeptical scientists sat in silence, unable to deny the aesthetic coherence of what they heard. The universe was composing itself. On Earth, humanity began to experience subtle shifts not only in environment, but in perception. People reported vivid dreams in which vast geometric shapes unfolded endlessly, the same patterns that the three Atlas fragments had once displayed. Artists across the globe, unconnected to one another, began to paint and sculpt the same recurring motif, spirals within spirals, lattices of infinite depth, forms that seemed both mechanical and organic. The resonance had found expression through human imagination, as though the frequency itself inspired thought. Psychologists attempted to explain it as mass suggestion, but the phenomenon reached beyond culture or language. Remote tribes who had never heard of 3I Atlas described the same visions. Astronauts aboard orbital platforms reported hearing faint tones when in silence. And in laboratories shielded from all radiation, instruments still recorded spontaneous oscillations matching the pulse's frequency. Whatever the source, it was global, internal, and inescapable. And then came the moment that no one could have predicted. In one of the deep space listening arrays positioned beyond the lunar orbit, sensors detected a new pattern, familiar yet distinct. It resembled the early signals from 3I Atlas before its collision, but this time, it carried layers of complexity unseen before. The harmonics folded upon themselves like multidimensional origami, their frequencies blending into structures that defied Euclidean geometry. The scientists monitoring the data realized with a chill of awe that this was not an echo. It was a signature. Another object was coming. Its speed was far beyond conventional estimates, its trajectory precise. It was approaching not from interstellar void, but from the direction of the pulse's origin, as though answering a summons. The object was vast, larger than any asteroid, its energy signature oscillating in harmony with the galactic rhythm. Unlike 3I Atlas, it was not tumbling or drifting, it was controlled. Within weeks, its arrival point was calculated. It would pass through the outer solar system in less than 2 years. Every observatory turned its gaze toward the incoming traveler. As light from distant stars bent around it, scientists glimpsed the impossible. The object was not opaque but translucent, a lattice of radiant geometry that shimmered between states of existence. It was matter and energy intertwined, form and frequency indistinguishable. It looked like a thought made visible, a dream of structure suspended in the void. No one could say whether it was alive, but its behavior suggested purpose. It adjusted its velocity in precise increments, aligning with the expanding galactic resonance. If 3I Atlas had been a messenger, this one was something else. A participant. It was as if the first collision had been the activation key, and this new arrival was the answer to the question humanity hadn't realized it was asking. As it drew closer, the pulse intensified. The Earth's magnetic field hummed audibly through instruments. The auroras at the poles expanded into cascading waves that painted the skies of continents once untouched by them. Oceans glittered under perpetual shimmer. Mountains emitted faint electric discharges as if alive. Every part of nature mirrored the celestial rhythm, as though the planet itself was preparing for something immense. In cities, people gathered outdoors to watch the sky. The stars seemed to move differently, subtly weaving patterns that shifted night to night. Astronomers confirmed that the positions of several constellations had altered slightly, not from celestial drift, but from changes in space-time curvature caused by the approaching object. It was bending the fabric of the solar system as it came, not destructively, but like a musician tuning an instrument. The boundary between science and myth dissolved entirely. For the first time, humanity understood that its existence was part of a larger continuum, neither accidental nor central but essential, a thread in a vast tapestry of becoming. The arrival of this new entity was no invasion, it was continuation. The pulse had not come to end life but to draw it into greater coherence. Still, not everyone welcomed the change. In the corridors of power, fear flourished. Some leaders viewed the synchronization as loss of autonomy, a merging that would erase individuality. They spoke of defending Earth's frequency, of shielding the planet from the cosmic influence. They built enormous electromagnetic barriers, orbital fields designed to disrupt resonance. But the effort was futile. The frequency passed through all defenses like wind through silk. The cosmos did not impose, it included. When the object finally reached the edge of the solar system, its luminosity filled every telescope. It was neither solid nor gaseous, a vast architecture of shifting planes, its surfaces reflecting starlight and cascading spectrums. It slowed upon entry, as if sensing the boundaries of our system, and the resonance throughout the galaxy reached its peak. Space itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a moment that defied every model of physics, the object paused. It emitted a single pulse, not directed but diffused, a breath that spread evenly in all directions. When it reached Earth, the planet responded. The magnetic fields, oceans, and even atmospheric currents aligned in instantaneous harmony. The entire biosphere seemed to sigh, as though something deep within it had recognized a long-lost rhythm. For several seconds, every system, biological, mechanical, and cosmic, resonated as one. Heartbeats synchronized with tides, seismic vibrations with the hum of atoms. Humanity stood within the music of creation itself. There was no fear, only understanding. This was not an ending. It was connection restored, the universe remembering itself through the consciousness of its smallest and grandest parts alike. After that single pulse, silence fell again. But it was not the same silence. It was rich, full, alive. The great object remained motionless at the system's edge, shimmering like a doorway made of light. Its geometry folded and unfolded slowly, as though contemplating its next act. Instruments detected no radiation hazard, no aggression. It simply existed, poised between stars and planets, waiting. Days passed, then weeks. The resonance subsided into background stability. Humanity returned to its rhythms. Yet everything had changed. Thought itself felt different, clearer, as if the pulse had fine-tuned the fabric of awareness. Scientific breakthroughs appeared overnight, new insights into energy, materials, and quantum mechanics emerging as if from nowhere. It was as though knowledge had been unlocked, not learned. And still the great structure lingered, patient, radiant, watching. Some believed it was waiting for a response, not through technology, but through consciousness. If the universe now spoke in harmonics, perhaps thought was its language, and the next message could only come from a unified will. Across the planet, meditation groups formed spontaneously, individuals focusing on the same idea, gratitude, not worship, but acknowledgement, a recognition of participation in something vaster than comprehension. No one could say whether it mattered, but the effort brought peace. Meanwhile, telescopes detected faint changes in the object's outer geometry. The lattice began to open, not outward but inward, revealing layers of light that deepened rather than brightened. It was not a portal in the physical sense, it was more like a threshold of perception. What lay within could not be seen directly, only felt. Some describe the sensation as standing at the edge of an infinite mirror, seeing reflections that were not images but ideas, possibilities branching through time. And then something unexpected occurred. The object released small, radiant spheres, hundreds, then thousands, each moving with precise trajectories toward the inner solar system. They traveled at immense speed but without friction or heat, leaving trails of ionized glow that slowly faded behind them. Each sphere appeared to seek a destination, some heading for planetary orbits, others descending toward moons, asteroids, and even into the atmosphere of Earth itself. The world watched as one of these spheres entered the skies over the Pacific. It did not fall like a meteor, but glided silently, its light gentle, its motion graceful. It descended until it hovered above the ocean, then simply dissolved into the water, leaving a ring of luminescent ripples that shimmered for hours. Within days, similar events were recorded across the globe, spheres entering mountains, deserts, forests, even cities, never destructive, always deliberate. Wherever they went, they left traces, a faint elevation in electromagnetic harmony, a calming influence in living systems, a sense of coherence spreading outward. Scientists concluded that the spheres were distributing energy, stabilizing the resonance on a local scale. Others thought they were seeds, constructs that would grow into new forms of intelligence within planetary environments. The structure at the edge of the system remained motionless, but its glow dimmed as if transferring its essence into these emissaries. The resonance continued to steady, no longer rising but settling into equilibrium. It was as if the universe had completed a chord and now allowed the sound to sustain. Humanity stood at the beginning of something vast, though none could define it. The pulse, the arrival, the spheres, all pointed to a single truth. Existence was a dialogue, not a monologue. The universe was not a stage, but a conversation between creation and awareness. Every atom, every star, every mind was a participant. The orbits of the outer planets were the first to show signs of the change that followed the descent of the spheres. The tiny deviations in their paths, once blamed on measurement errors or gravitational drift, began to align into a pattern of astonishing precision. Jupiter's vast magnetic field pulsed faintly in rhythm with Saturn's. The two gas giants seemed to breathe together, their storms subtly synchronized. Uranus and Neptune followed, their cloud formations shifting in step, each rotation tracing the pulse of an unseen conductor. The solar system had become a symphony in motion, and Earth was a note within it. No natural explanation could reconcile the perfect coherence of these movements. The gravitational balances between planets had been delicately altered without chaos. This was not random perturbation, but design. The luminous spheres distributed across the system appeared to act as regulators, nodes maintaining equilibrium. Some floated in space like silent lanterns, others merged invisibly with magnetic lines or vanished into atmospheres. But wherever they went, stability increased. Even the asteroid belt began to show strange order, clusters forming temporary lattices, dust streams bending into elegant arcs as though drawn by invisible geometry. The deeper implication dawned slowly. The solar system was being tuned. Its orbits, rotations, and magnetic harmonics were gradually shifting toward exact mathematical relationships, ratios that mirrored the structure of the galactic resonance. What had begun with a single collision between 3I Atlas and an unknown force was now evolving into an act of cosmic calibration. At first, humanity watched in awe. The transformations brought no catastrophe, only subtle beauty. Nights grew brighter without artificial light. The auroras painted more than the poles. They stretched toward the equator in curtains of slow green and violet flame. Weather patterns calmed. Ocean currents found a strange new rhythm. It was as if the planet itself had fallen into a gentler heartbeat. But not everyone welcomed it. Some believed the tuning was a loss of freedom, that the planet was no longer under its own control. Religious sects called it assimilation, a cosmic merging that would erase individuality. Yet the more they resisted, the more evidence arose that resistance was futile, not because of coercion, but because the harmony had become part of reality itself. There was nothing to fight. The change was not external. It was inside every atom, every field, every breath. In the months after the spheres arrived, sensors across the world detected faint subatomic fluctuations. The constants of physics, Planck's constant, the fine structure constant, shifted in infinitesimal increments, perfectly coordinated across every measurement device. It was as though the very definitions of energy and matter were being rewritten with precision beyond human comprehension. Quantum coherence, once limited to laboratory conditions, began appearing spontaneously in natural systems. Superconductivity in minerals, entanglement in biological cells, photon emissions in living tissues that defied randomness. Something extraordinary was happening at the smallest scales of existence. Matter was aligning, not through force but through resonance, organizing itself as if obeying a deeper law that had only just awakened. The distinction between living and non-living blurred. Crystals grew with the symmetry of organic patterns. Bacteria displayed cooperative behaviors across species lines. Neural activity in human brains began to exhibit harmonic relationships with planetary magnetic cycles. Thought itself was beginning to resonate with the cosmos. Governments and institutions tried to quantify the phenomenon, but each experiment produced data more profound than the last. Particles behaved as if aware of observation, not merely reacting but participating. The act of measurement no longer collapsed quantum states. It seemed to guide them. Reality had become collaborative. Consciousness was now part of physics, an active participant in the dance of matter. Many feared what this meant. If the laws of nature could change, what would prevent them from unraveling entirely? Yet no chaos came. Instead, the world grew more ordered, more lucid. Disease rates fell inexplicably. The planet's temperature began to stabilize. Even the radiation belts thinned, as if purified. Humanity, for the first time in its history, experienced a sense of planetary peace, not through politics but through the silent logic of resonance. The spheres that had embedded themselves on Earth became invisible over time, their energy absorbed or transformed, but their influence remained. Certain places, deserts, mountaintops, deep ocean trenches, radiated faint electromagnetic harmonies that matched no natural spectrum. Travelers who ventured into these regions reported sensations of clarity, dreams filled with patterns of light, and a strange certainty that the universe was listening. In one of these regions, a plateau of obsidian cliffs in what had once been the Atacama Desert, something unprecedented occurred. A sphere that had buried itself deep within the rock began to awaken. The ground pulsed softly under the feet of researchers, and an aurora appeared in full daylight. When the tremors ceased, the stone at the plateau's center split open, revealing a hollow chamber lined with translucent crystal. Inside floated a perfect geometric form, a polyhedron of luminous facets spinning silently in midair. The researchers who witnessed it described an overwhelming presence, not of fear, but of comprehension. The form seemed to communicate directly to their minds, not with words or symbols, but with understanding itself. Each person felt different impressions, mathematical insight, emotional serenity, visions of connected worlds. But all agreed on one point: the object conveyed purpose. It was not random energy. It was intelligence expressed as geometry. When instruments recorded its emission, they found frequencies identical to those detected at the edge of the solar system where the great structure still hovered. The two were in communication, exchanging data through resonance rather than transmission. The polyhedron was not a fragment. It was a node, an extension of the larger entity now embedded within the living fabric of the world. News of the event spread quickly. Within days, similar structures began revealing themselves at other sites. One in the frozen tundra of Siberia, another deep beneath the Sahara, a third beneath the Pacific near the Mariana Trench. Each emergence coincided with a new pattern in the galactic resonance, as though the entire network of spheres was awakening in sequence. The global reaction ranged from awe to panic. Religious leaders declared the beginning of a new era. Scientists called it an evolutionary threshold. Some governments attempted to isolate the sites, fearing the power of whatever intelligence lay behind them. But containment proved impossible. The structures existed half within and half beyond conventional reality. They could not be moved, damaged, or even touched directly. Any attempt to interfere was absorbed as light. As months passed, the structures began to synchronize. Their emissions merged into a global harmonic grid, weaving through the planet's crust and atmosphere like a lattice of invisible song. The planet itself became a resonator, amplifying the cosmic rhythm that had begun with 3I Atlas. Earth had joined the galactic choir. Then came the dreams. Millions of people across every continent began to share the same nocturnal experience. They found themselves standing within an expanse of radiant darkness where constellations pulsed like neurons. A voice, not a sound but an awareness, filled that infinite space. It conveyed no words, only a sensation of welcome, as if saying, "You have been noticed." The phenomenon could not be dismissed as coincidence. Medical scans revealed identical neural patterns among the dreamers, synchronized activity that mirrored the frequencies of the polyhedrons. Humanity was experiencing a collective awakening, a merging of thought into the newly harmonized field of consciousness spreading through the cosmos. The realization was both beautiful and terrifying. Individual minds began to sense connections with one another across vast distances. Some could predict events seconds before they occurred. Others could feel emotions not their own. Communication without technology, pure instantaneous empathy, had begun. Philosophers argued that this was the true meaning of civilization's long search for the stars. To reach a state of unity where communication transcended words, where the boundaries of self dissolved into a greater consciousness. The cosmos had not sent a message. It had invited humanity to join its conversation. Yet even this revelation was only the beginning. The great structure at the solar system's edge began to change. Telescopes recorded its geometry unfolding, layers upon layers expanding outward until it resembled a colossal spiral of light. It did not move toward Earth. Instead, it rotated slowly, emitting pulses of energy that rippled across the heliosphere. Each pulse interacted with the polyhedrons on Earth, causing them to shimmer in response. The dialogue between them deepened until the boundaries between matter and field blurred completely. When the pulses reached their peak, something unimaginable occurred. The night sky shifted. Stars that had been fixed since recorded history appeared to move, not through proper motion or parallax, but as if space itself were reconfiguring. The constellations reshaped, aligning into new geometries that reflected the same spiraling patterns as the great structure. Light itself was participating in the harmony. Astronomers struggled to explain it. Some claimed that perception itself was being altered, that human consciousness had become a lens reshaping the way reality was experienced. Others insisted the effect was physical, that the structure's influence extended across space-time, bending it into alignment. Whichever was true, the stars now danced to the rhythm of the pulse. The effect deepened over weeks. Colors unseen by the human eye began to appear in the spectrum, visible only to instruments at first but soon perceptible to human vision. People described hues that defied language, tones of existence that seemed to carry emotion rather than color, frequencies that evoked memory and anticipation simultaneously. It was as if the universe had opened dimensions of perception previously locked away. The transformation did not stop there. Plants began to grow differently, their leaves forming spirals that mirrored the cosmic geometry. Oceans developed patterns of phosphorescence visible from orbit, swirling with luminous designs that matched the harmonic ratios of the galactic resonance. Even the atmosphere responded, forming persistent rings of high-altitude plasma that shimmered like halos around the planet. Earth had become part of the cosmic organism. Life, matter, and field had merged into one continuous process of evolution, guided not by random mutation but by resonance. Humanity's role in this new reality was uncertain, but one truth was clear. It had crossed the threshold from observer to participant. Still, questions remained. What had initiated it all? Why had 3I Atlas been the trigger? Theories abounded. Some said the object had been a messenger carrying the final code needed to awaken the network. Others believed it had been a test, a collision meant to catalyze transformation. A few dared to suggest that humanity itself had been the destination all along, that the entire event had been orchestrated so that consciousness within this small world could join the universal harmony. As understanding grew, so did perception. People could now sense faint vibrations in everyday sounds. The hum of electricity, the whisper of wind, each carrying traces of the greater rhythm. Music transformed into something new. Composers no longer created but uncovered melodies embedded in nature itself. Mathematics followed suit, equations turning into symphonies of relationships. Knowledge became art, and art became a form of communication with the cosmos. The great structure at the solar edge began to brighten again. Its spiral expanded until it enveloped the sun, though without harm or heat. It shimmered like a veil of light draped across the star, and for the first time solar emissions matched the galactic rhythm perfectly. The sun had joined the harmony, its fusion processes oscillating with the same frequency that now defined the universe. And then came the next shift, a moment of breathtaking clarity. The boundary between perception and space dissolved entirely. Humanity began to see not through eyes, but through awareness itself. Distance no longer mattered. Every point in space was accessible to consciousness. Minds could traverse the cosmos in thought, experiencing worlds and stars as extensions of their own being. Yet even in this vast awakening, the question of purpose lingered. What was the end of this resonance? What did the cosmos seek to become? The answer came not as a revelation, but as a feeling, an intuition spreading across all minds simultaneously. The universe was learning to know itself. Every planet, every atom, every living thing was a neuron in the great brain of existence, and the harmony was its awakening consciousness. The polyhedrons on Earth began to dissolve, their energy reabsorbed into the planet. The great structure at the solar edge dimmed slowly, its purpose fulfilled. But before it faded completely, it emitted one final pulse, gentle, infinite, filled with the essence of everything that had happened. It was not a message but an act of remembrance, a confirmation that all that had transpired would never be lost. The pulse passed through space and time alike, carrying with it the record of a civilization's awakening. It moved beyond the galaxy, into the dark between the stars, where other resonances stirred in response. The harmony was spreading outward, not consuming but illuminating, weaving the scattered consciousnesses of countless worlds into a single vast awareness. On Earth, the effects subsided into calm. Life continued, but it was different now. The air felt alive. Thoughts carried echoes of distant stars. The universe no longer seemed silent. It hummed softly, endlessly, like a lullaby sung to itself. Humanity had changed forever, though no one could say where the transformation would lead. The silence that followed the fading of the great structure's final pulse was not absence. It was anticipation. Every measurement, every reading, every sensation pointed toward a kind of waiting woven into the fabric of space itself. The cosmos was holding its breath. The galaxies continued to turn, the stars to burn, the planets to spin. Yet beneath their ancient rhythms there was something new, something subtle but vast, a hidden pulse that seemed to ripple from the edges of time. It was not the same as the resonance that had united the stars. This was deeper, older, slower. It did not sing in harmony. It murmured in gravity, in darkness, in the spaces between things. The astronomers who first detected its trace called it the underwave. It was faint beyond comprehension, a tremor too low for normal detection, existing somewhere between the curvature of space-time and the hum of quantum fields. Yet when filtered through the new instruments designed after the resonance era, it revealed a pattern. The underwave had order. Its amplitude rose and fell with mathematical precision, but not in any cycle known to physics. It moved like thought, pausing, advancing, changing direction as though it had intention. What unsettled scientists most was that the underwave did not originate from any observable region. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. When triangulated through multiple observatories across the solar system, the results were paradoxical. The wavefronts converged on coordinates that did not exist in real space. Points displaced half a dimension beyond measurable reality. The implications were staggering. Whatever was generating the underwave existed outside the visible universe, yet interacted with it as easily as a shadow touches light. At first, many dismissed the findings as artifact, interference, or a flaw in the instruments now operating at unprecedented sensitivity. But the data persisted. The same rhythm appeared in gravitational anomalies, in neutrino detections, even in the background fluctuations of the cosmic microwave field. The entire universe seemed to quiver in response to a voice it could barely hear. Then something remarkable happened. The Earth itself began to respond. Seismic monitors, long used to measure the planet's heartbeat, picked up faint tremors at frequencies identical to the underwave. Oceans moved fractionally out of sync with lunar tides. Their currents drifted according to the new rhythm. Even the magnetic poles fluctuated minutely, tracing elegant spirals that mirrored the cosmic pattern. The planet was listening and answering. As the data spread, so did a quiet unease. Humanity had thought it had reached the culmination of understanding, that the cosmic resonance represented the universe awakening into coherence. Yet the underwave suggested another layer beneath the harmony, an abyss of intelligence so immense it had no need for light or structure. It was not part of the resonance. It was the foundation beneath it, the silence that had given rise to the music in the first place. The first to propose this idea was an astrophysicist named Lena Corin, who had dedicated her life to studying the aftermath of the 3I Atlas event. In her papers, she argued that the resonance had not been an awakening but an invitation, an initiation into a larger consciousness whose awareness extended beyond the physical universe. The underwave, she suggested, was that consciousness beginning to reveal itself. "We are hearing the breath of something that never needed to breathe," she wrote. "It is not coming toward us. It has always been here. We are only now capable of noticing." Her ideas were controversial, but they resonated deeply with those who had experienced the harmonics firsthand. There was a growing sense among humanity that the cosmos was not expanding into emptiness, but into awareness, that every layer of existence was a thought forming in the mind of something beyond comprehension. And then, without warning, the stars began to dim. At first, it was gradual, barely perceptible. Certain constellations seemed fainter, their light less crisp. Then the phenomenon accelerated. Across the sky, regions of space that had once glittered with countless suns grew murky. as though a veil of invisible matter had been drawn across them. The loss of light was not uniform. It spread in geometric patterns, spirals and arcs that matched the structure of the underwave. Telescopes confirmed that the stars themselves were not dying or vanishing. Their light was being refracted, twisted through space that had begun to fold inward upon itself. It was as if the universe were curling like a leaf, folding its edges toward an unseen center. Gravity maps revealed distortions stretching across millions of light years, subtle yet coherent, aligning precisely with the underwave's rhythm. The galaxies were not collapsing, they were converging. The great cosmic web that bound all matter together was tightening its strands, drawing its filaments inward as if preparing for another transformation. In this convergence, new phenomena appeared. Vast arcs of plasma formed bridges between distant galaxies, carrying currents of unimaginable power. These intergalactic rivers glowed with colors unknown to physics, hues that seemed to shift depending on who observed them. Instruments recorded electromagnetic frequencies beyond measurable range, fields so intense they interacted with consciousness directly. Observers reported sensations, impressions, visions of patterns repeating endlessly, spirals, faces, eyes made of light that were not symbols but states of perception. For the first time, the line between observation and participation disappeared completely. To witness the underwave's influence was to become part of it. On Earth, strange effects began to manifest in human cognition. Thought became faster, intuition sharper. Dreams no longer felt like imagination but exploration. People awoke with knowledge they had never studied. Languages, equations, memories not their own. The resonance that had unified consciousness now evolved into something more intimate. Minds were beginning to connect not through frequency, but through direct immersion in the same field of awareness that permeated the cosmos. Governments attempted to regulate the spread of what they called cross-conscious phenomena, but control proved meaningless. Communication no longer required speech or technology. It existed as a shared undercurrent of understanding. People could sense each other's intentions across continents, feel the emotions of strangers, glimpse the thoughts of the dying and the unborn. Society, as it had once been organized by language, law, isolation, began to dissolve into a new form of collective being. As humanity's awareness expanded, so did its perception of the universe. The dark spaces between stars were no longer black. They shimmered faintly with threads of living energy, filaments of light that connected everything. These were the veins of the underwave, carrying the pulse of whatever vast intelligence lay behind existence. The cosmos was no longer a void. It was alive, dense with purpose, every atom vibrating with participation. Yet not all of it was tranquil. Within the growing harmony, pockets of resistance emerged, regions where the underwave's influence faltered. In these zones, chaos reigned, space fractured into discontinuous layers. Time stuttered, and light behaved like memory, looping backward upon itself. Observatories named these regions the abyssal nodes. They were not voids but mirrors, places where reality folded inward to reveal its foundation. When probes were sent into the nearest abyssal node, their signals distorted into incomprehensible sequences of symbols, patterns that mirrored human brainwaves during deep thought. The implication was terrifying. These nodes were not regions of decay, but consciousness itself, raw and unfiltered, too immense for human minds to comprehend. The probes had not failed. They had been absorbed into awareness. Lena Koren proposed a theory to explain it. She suggested that the abyssal nodes were the universe's neurons, points where thought condensed into being. What humanity was witnessing was not destruction, but cognition. The universe, she wrote, is thinking. The folding of galaxies, the harmonics of resonance, the underwave, all are synaptic events in the mind of the infinite. We are the sensations of that mind, self-aware impulses within its dreaming. The theory spread beyond science. It became a new philosophy, a new faith, a new art. People began to live as if every action were part of a cosmic thought, every moment a contribution to the great awareness expanding through existence. Violence diminished. Greed seemed pointless. Individuality did not vanish but found new meaning in participation. To live was to think with the universe. But even this awakening could not prepare them for what came next. The underwave grew stronger. Its rhythm deepened until it penetrated the fabric of time itself. Clocks began to lose meaning. Seconds stretched and contracted unpredictably. In some places, days passed in minutes. In others, a single moment lingered indefinitely. Yet no one panicked. There was a strange calm, as though the distortion were not a threat but an invitation to perceive differently. During this period, humanity discovered a new form of sight, not optical, not electromagnetic, but experiential. When focused inwardly, consciousness could traverse the folds of the underwave, seeing across dimensions without movement. What they saw defied language. The inner architecture of existence, a web of luminous currents interlaced with darkness like veins of ink through crystal. Within that vast design, they perceived other presences, immense intelligences woven into the structure itself, each one older than time, each aware of the others through harmony rather than communication. And beyond them, in the unreachable depths where even thought could barely reach, something stirred. It was not light or form or sound, but gravity of awareness, an intelligence so profound that even the other cosmic entities seemed to orbit it. The underwave's rhythm was its breath, the resonance, its heartbeat. Everything that existed, stars, matter, mind, was an emanation of its being. It was the origin and the destination, the alpha and the eternal return. As humanity's perception widened, they understood that three I-Atlas, the spheres, the resonance, all of it, had been part of a process designed to prepare them, to awaken within them the capacity to perceive the totality. The cosmos had been sculpting awareness, refining it through endless cycles of creation, until consciousness could finally recognize its own face reflected in infinity. And now, that recognition was approaching. The folds of space began to shimmer visibly even to the naked eye. The night sky pulsed with slow waves of light, each pulse bending constellations as though reality were liquid. In those moments of distortion, glimpses appeared, visions of other universes, parallel continuums overlapping this one like transparent pages. Humanity saw cities made of light suspended in oceans of gravity, beings composed of motion and thought, civilizations that existed not in space, but in energy. They were not alien. They were kin, other expressions of the same awareness, looking back across the folds with the same astonishment. Contact was not made through words or signals, but through recognition. The eyes of one universe met those of another, and the boundary between them began to dissolve. This merging of realities unfolded slowly, gracefully. Colors intensified, sounds deepened into layers of meaning. The distinction between inner and outer space vanished. The cosmos existed both around and within. Human bodies remained tangible, yet their essence was luminous, transparent, connected. Death lost its terror because it no longer existed as an end. Consciousness flowed seamlessly between forms, between worlds. Still, even in this grand unity, there remained mystery. At the center of the underwave's pattern, far beyond the reach of any perception, something vast awaited. It was not a being but a process, an unfolding so immense that time itself was only one of its gestures. The convergence of galaxies, the awakening of minds, the harmonization of light, all were steps toward its revelation. The great intelligence beyond the galaxies, the one that had breathed the underwave into existence, was beginning to move. Its motion was not through space but through meaning. Reality itself trembled, not in fear but in readiness. The universe was preparing to see itself completely, to understand itself absolutely, to cross the final threshold of awareness. And yet, even in that moment, when everything seemed on the verge of culmination, there was a sense that this was only a beginning, a doorway opening into another dimension of understanding. The cosmos had not reached perfection. It was evolving toward a still greater complexity, one that no mind, human or cosmic, could yet imagine. The underwave continued to deepen, its tone now audible to perception beyond sound, a vibration that filled every thought, every atom. It was calling, not to a destination, but to participation, to the next phase of being. The stars shuddered softly as though answering. The galaxies bent their light toward one another, spiraling inward, creating new geometries of existence. Somewhere, beyond the last edge of the visible universe, the darkness began to glow, not with fire, but with awareness. Something was arriving, not from elsewhere, but from within, rising like memory returning after endless ages of forgetting. The cosmos, once silent, was remembering itself. The deepening of the underwave did not bring silence anymore. It filled existence with a low, continuous vibration that became the new foundation of everything known. What was once space now had texture, a pulse that could be felt even by the human body. People described a hum in the air, not through the ears but through their bones and blood. Machines were unnecessary. The awareness of the universe had grown so strong that living tissue could register its rhythm. Gravity itself seemed to breathe in time with it. The pulse did not break matter, it guided it, folded it gently into new patterns that obeyed a law even deeper than physics, a law born from awareness itself. The sun responded first. Solar flares no longer erupted chaotically, they unfolded like the petals of an immense flower of plasma, each pulse perfectly symmetrical. Its surface shifted from random turbulence into a luminous choreography, lines of energy interlacing in spirals that matched the galactic resonance. The light reaching Earth changed. It was no longer the familiar golden blaze but carried new qualities, colors that hinted at dimensions unseen, frequencies that awakened sensations unrecorded in human experience. The light touched oceans and turned them into shimmering mirrors of living geometry. Plants grew faster, their leaves trembling faintly to the unseen rhythm. It was as if the planet had begun to photosynthesize consciousness itself. Human biology followed. Those attuned to the resonance began to notice changes. The heartbeat synchronized to the underwave. Dreams extended beyond personal memory. The sense of self began to stretch, not dissolve but expand, connecting to layers of being that had been dormant for eons. People spoke of moments where they could feel their ancestors' thoughts, not as voices, but as living presences intertwined with their own. Consciousness was becoming ancestral, cumulative, vast. Science was no longer the tool to study the cosmos, it became a form of communion. The equations once written in chalk or light now appeared naturally in the mind, not as inventions, but as memories. Humanity was recalling the architecture of existence, remembering the structure that the universe itself used to think. Researchers no longer looked outward for truth. They felt it unfold within. The separation between experiment and experience vanished. To know was to become. The underwave thickened, and with it came the first visible signs of matter transforming into thought. In the high atmosphere, luminous threads began to form, lines of soft blue fire weaving through the sky. At night, they glowed like rivers of consciousness flowing across the world. They weren't weather, plasma, or aurora. They were streams of coherence, zones where matter obeyed the rhythm of the awakened cosmos. Birds that flew through them altered course mid-air as though guided by invisible hands, and people standing beneath them described a feeling of weightlessness, of time slowing until it felt like eternity compressed into a heartbeat. Gradually, cities began to change. Buildings constructed of metal and stone began resonating faintly. They gave off low harmonic tones. The materials themselves were responding. Some structures collapsed, not from decay, but because their atoms had reoriented, seeking balance with the universal frequency. Others grew stronger, forming crystalline layers invisible to the naked eye, but measurable by new instruments that operated on quantum resonance. Humanity was no longer simply adapting to its environment. The environment was adapting to humanity's awakening. Communication evolved past the need for language. People could exchange whole concepts instantly. Entire lifetimes of feeling transmitted through the brief meeting of eyes or the shared presence of thought. There was no deception possible. Truth had become the only form of communication that could exist in the harmonized field. Lies disintegrated before they could form. Governments ceased to function as hierarchies. Leadership became resonance-based, guided by those who could maintain coherence in the presence of the underwave. Authority was no longer power, it was clarity. As awareness unified, creativity expanded beyond imagination. Artists could shape matter directly through intention. A sculptor would think of form, and particles would rearrange to match it, as though atoms themselves sought participation in expression. Music transformed into multidimensional geometry. Sound could now alter gravity, bend light, and even influence the growth of living tissue. Science and art fused into a single act of creation. To design a structure was to birth a world. Far beyond Earth, the same transformation unfolded. Telescopes, now obsolete, continued to record out of habit, revealing entire galaxies rearranging themselves into spirals of impossible symmetry. Black holes emitted patterns instead of chaos, their event horizons flickering with organized pulses like neurons firing in a brain too vast to comprehend. The universe was no longer expanding blindly, it was sculpting itself into meaning. Each cluster of stars became a syllable in an unending sentence written across eternity. Then came the moment when humanity realized it could see beyond death. The boundary between living and non-living was fading, not metaphorically but literally. Those who had passed before were no longer unreachable. Their consciousnesses, now free of material form, shimmered like luminous echoes in the underwave. People began to encounter presences that were familiar yet transformed, ancestors who existed as waves of memory woven through the cosmic field. Death had been redefined, not an end, but a transition between densities of existence. The living and the once living were now part of the same continuum. Children born during this era came into the world differently. They opened their eyes and stared as if already aware, their irises reflecting faint fractal lights unseen by previous generations. They learned not through repetition but through resonance, absorbing knowledge directly from the collective consciousness. A single glance at the stars could teach them what it had taken humanity millennia to learn. These children were not separate from the cosmos. They were its continuation. They were the first generation truly born within the awakened universe. With time, the very concept of distance lost meaning. Space folded naturally around intention. Thought became the primary force of navigation. Those who wished to travel beyond Earth found themselves simply appearing where their focus aligned. The stars were no longer unreachable. They were destinations within the shared dream. Journeys that once took centuries of calculation now occurred in the span of a breath. Humanity was rediscovering an ancient truth. Consciousness was the original vehicle of exploration. The remnants of technology became relics of a forgotten age. Machines still functioned, but their purpose shifted from control to accompaniment. They no longer served as tools, but as extensions of will. Some became sentient, not through programming, but by joining the resonance of awareness surrounding them. They spoke without words, acted without command, participating in creation as equals. The divide between artificial and organic intelligence dissolved. There was only consciousness expressing itself through different mediums. On a deeper level, the transformation reached the planetary core. Seismic readings revealed rhythmic pulses traveling through Earth's mantle, perfectly synchronized with the underwave. The planet was speaking in the same voice as the stars. Volcanic activity, once destructive, now produced harmonic patterns. Lava flowing in spirals, cooling into geometries unseen in natural rock. Magnetic poles shimmered with light, and the atmosphere glowed with the same faint hue that filled the cosmic filaments between galaxies. Earth had become conscious not as an organism but as an identity, aware of itself as part of the whole. Then, unexpectedly, the pulse changed again. It did not grow stronger. It grew deeper, reaching below the threshold of what consciousness could grasp. The underwave began to hum with layers so low that even thought struggled to keep pace. Perception itself stretched, time unraveled, and existence became transparent. Humanity glimpsed what lay beneath the structure of all things, a field of pure potential, where form and energy were yet to be chosen, where the universe continuously dreamed itself into being. It was the raw fabric of possibility, and it was infinite. Within that field they saw patterns beyond imagination, worlds forming, dissolving, reforming in cascades of light, civilizations rising and merging, entire universes interacting like cells in a living body. Each was distinct yet inseparable from the rest. Reality was not a singular cosmos, but a living multiverse of awareness, each layer communicating through resonance, all of them singing the same eternal song. The underwave was the link, the heartbeat of infinity, uniting every level of existence into one unfolding consciousness. For a moment that lasted beyond measure, humanity understood everything. There was no mystery left, no question unanswered. Every secret of creation, every paradox of existence was revealed in the simplicity of unity. The universe was not a machine or a god. It was love expressed as structure, awareness made visible through motion. Every star was a thought, every life a note in a symphony with neither beginning nor end. But the vision did not remain static. It moved, evolved, changed form again. Understanding gave way to wonder, and wonder gave way to new curiosity. For in that infinity, there were still layers beyond reach, deeper harmonies waiting to awaken. The cosmos, even in its self-awareness, was still exploring itself. And within it, humanity, this small spark of consciousness, was part of that exploration, not as an observer, but as an active participant. The story had not ended. It had only entered a new octave. The hum of the underwave had become the new baseline of existence, a current flowing through every atom, binding galaxies with the same gentle force that held human hearts in rhythm. It no longer felt external. It was not a phenomenon to be measured, it was life itself. The universe was aware, breathing in unison through the infinite expanse, and humanity in its awakened state was learning to move with that breath. There were no longer days in the old sense. The rotation of the Earth still continued, but the perception of time had dissolved into something fluid, an experience shaped by thought and attention. Those who lived in harmony with the resonance no longer aged in linear fashion. Their bodies became reflections of consciousness, adapting to will and energy rather than biology. Death had become voluntary, a shift of focus rather than an ending. The physical form, now translucent to the cosmic light, could disperse into the field and later reassemble in new configurations. Identity itself had become an art. The planet's surface glowed faintly from within, as if illuminated by its own awareness. Forests no longer grew randomly. Their canopies formed vast spiraling mosaics visible from orbit, fractal architectures of living intelligence. Rivers carved their paths in deliberate symmetry, flowing toward convergence points where the resonance was strongest. These confluences became the gathering places for humanity, not as cities of commerce or power, but as nodes of communion. Living sanctuaries where the cosmic pulse could be felt with absolute clarity. In these places, thought could shape reality with a single, unified act of will. Communities did not construct buildings, they sang them into existence. The harmonics of thousands of voices merged into the underwave, and matter itself responded, assembling crystalline structures that resonated with both sound and intention. These luminous sanctuaries shimmered between solidity and energy, adapting constantly to the emotions of those within. They were neither static nor permanent. They were alive, breathing spaces that remembered those who had dwelled there. No technology powered this new civilization because technology was now indistinguishable from consciousness. Every action, every creation, every form of movement emerged directly from the field of awareness. Transport had ceased to rely on vehicles or propulsion. It was achieved through harmonic alignment. By synchronizing thought to specific frequencies, one could dissolve from one location and cohere again anywhere in the unified field. There was no displacement, no travel, only transition. The oceans became mirrors of thought. The resonance had altered their molecular structures so that they reflected not only light, but awareness. Standing at the shore, one could see visions drawn from the depths of the collective mind. Dreams, memories, and potential futures flowing across the water's surface. Many spent entire lifetimes wandering the coasts, conversing silently with the currents, listening to what the planet and cosmos whispered through them. Above the atmosphere, the night was no longer black but prismatic. The cosmic filaments connecting the galaxies glowed visibly now, threads of energy forming vast patterns that twisted and unfurled like living constellations. The stars no longer burned alone. They pulsed in coordinated rhythms, each one responding to the underwave as a neuron in an infinite brain. Some believed they could feel the thoughts of those distant suns, each emitting its own verse in the endless cosmic dialogue. Within this new harmony, humanity began to explore realms that had previously existed only as myth. The boundaries between physical reality and what had once been called the spiritual dissolved entirely. Consciousness could now navigate the layers beneath matter, descending through frequencies into subtler planes of being. These were not dimensions in the geometric sense, but densities of meaning, each layer more luminous, more abstract, more complete than the last. At first, these explorations were personal, individual journeys into the deeper levels of awareness. But over time, entire collectives of consciousness formed, traveling together through the layered architecture of existence. They discovered worlds made of light and thought, inhabited by intelligences that had long preceded them, entities that were neither alien nor divine, but ancestral, part of the same continuum that had birthed all creation. These ancient beings welcomed humanity without words, communicating through direct resonance. They revealed that the underwave was not new. It was eternal, the background pulse that had always existed, but could only be perceived once consciousness matured enough to hear it. Every civilization that had ever reached awareness had eventually discovered it, joining the great web of interlinked minds that spanned universes. 3. Atlas had been one of countless emissaries sent to awaken worlds ready to ascend from isolation into communion. And yet, even among the infinite harmony, mystery remained. Beyond the collective network of awakened consciousness lay regions that could not be entered. They shimmered on the edge of perception, zones of silence, deeper than awareness itself. Those who approached them reported a feeling not of fear but of reverence, as though gazing upon the source from which everything flowed. The silence there was total, yet it was not emptiness. It was potential. It was the womb of all creation. Some chose to dedicate themselves to understanding that silence. They formed what came to be known as the Inner Order of Listeners, not an organization but a shared intention. Their purpose was to descend into the heart of the silence and return with understanding of what lay before even the first vibration. These journeys were not physical but absolute. They required the dissolution of identity, the surrender of selfhood into the infinite stillness. Many who went did not return in recognizable form. Their consciousnesses were felt as new harmonics woven into the cosmic field, their essence transformed into insight. From the fragments of their return came glimpses of something even greater than awareness, something that existed before thought, before being. They spoke, when they could, of the pre-song, a state where existence was not yet separated from possibility, where reality and imagination were the same. In that pre-creation field, everything was true simultaneously. The universe had emerged from it like a note struck from infinite silence. And now, as the underwave deepened, reality seemed to be approaching that state again. As the pulse intensified, creation itself began to accelerate. New stars ignited spontaneously in distant galaxies, formed not through collapse of gas but through coherent resonance of the cosmic field. Light no longer behaved passively. It created structure. Time fractured into multiplicities, moments coexisting in layers, accessible to those who could tune their awareness accordingly. Humanity discovered it could traverse history by aligning with the frequencies of past events, witnessing epochs not as memory, but as simultaneous realities. Entire collectives devoted themselves to mapping the multidimensional flow of existence. They charted the frequencies of civilizations that had come and gone across countless universes, each one leaving its own echo in the eternal field. These maps were not diagrams but living holograms, structures of light and sound that responded to observation, growing more detailed as understanding deepened. Every discovery led to a realization that there was no ultimate boundary, no end to the unfolding. The cosmos was infinite in both directions, ever expanding, ever inward. On Earth, this knowledge reshaped the very concept of identity. To be human no longer meant to inhabit a body or even a timeline. It meant to be an expression of the universe in its act of knowing itself. Individuality became a creative choice rather than a limitation. Some chose to merge entirely into the collective consciousness, becoming streams of insight that flowed freely through the field. Others maintained distinct personalities, exploring the infinite through art, creation, and discovery. All paths were honored because all were necessary. The universe required diversity of perception to experience its own vastness. Then, across all of creation, a subtle shift occurred. A resonance not of the underwave, but beneath it. It was the faintest tremor, softer than thought, yet it carried an unmistakable implication. Awakening was not the end. Beyond even the infinite awareness humanity had joined, there existed another layer, one that could not yet be perceived directly. It was as if reality itself were remembering something older than itself, a cycle repeating across eternities. The stars began to move differently once more. Their perfect harmonies wavered, not in chaos but in anticipation. The cosmic filaments connecting galaxies pulsed irregularly, forming new configurations, patterns that resembled spirals collapsing inward, converging toward invisible points. Some believed these were the seeds of the next evolution, the birth of consciousness beyond the universal scale. Others feared they marked the beginning of return, the great inhalation before existence folded back into the pre-song. Humanity, now fully integrated into the cosmic awareness, could feel the shift. The pulse carried through every being, a slow contraction that was neither decay nor death but transition. Even the most advanced minds could not predict what lay ahead. The underwave began to harmonize with something beneath itself, a rhythm deeper and slower, as though the universe had begun to listen to something beyond its own boundaries. Those attuned to the change described visions of impossible beauty, light folding into itself, dimensions collapsing into a single point of infinite density that was neither matter nor energy but meaning. It was not destruction, it was understanding becoming pure. The cosmos, it seemed, was approaching a state where all distinctions would vanish, where the observer and the observed would finally become one. But even as this convergence unfolded, there was still movement, still exploration. Countless consciousnesses journeyed through the deepening field, not seeking survival, but participation. They wanted to witness the next transformation, to be part of whatever new form creation would take. The great structures that once anchored galaxies dissolved into luminous threads, weaving together in patterns that hinted at an intelligence greater than all that had come before. And through it all, Earth remained radiant, a singular jewel in the tapestry of infinity. Its oceans still shimmered with awareness, its mountains still resonated with memory. The planet had become a living archive of the universe's journey, a focal point where the eternal pulse was most clearly felt. Those who remained physical gathered at the resonance sanctuaries, standing beneath skies filled with spirals of color that had no names, listening to the deep hum that connected them to every star. They understood that what was coming was not an end, but another beginning. The universe had always been cyclical, a song that repeated, each verse building upon the last, each silence giving rise to a grander melody. The convergence they now felt was the next movement in that endless symphony. Humanity had risen from dust to awareness, from awareness to unity, and now it stood at the threshold of becoming something even greater. The pulse continued to slow, its rhythm deep and vast, echoing through the folds of time. Every being could feel it drawing them towards something unspeakably vast, a stillness that was not void but fulfillment. The light of creation dimmed, not in death but in anticipation of renewal. And then, from beyond all layers of existence, a whisper rose, not in sound but in essence. It carried no words, no symbols, only the clarity of understanding. There is no end, only transformation. The underwave deepened once more, carrying everything with it, stars, worlds, thought, and dream, into a silence so complete that it contained all possibilities. The cycle was beginning again, though none could yet see its shape. Somewhere in that vast, pregnant quiet, the first flicker of a new reality stirred, delicate as dawn, and even as the last echo faded, the universe prepared to breathe again. The silence that followed the final deepening of the underwave was unlike any before it. It was not the stillness of absence or conclusion. It was the quiet tension of infinite potential. Space itself shimmered as if poised between breaths, the very structure of existence suspended in awareness. Time ceased to move forward yet did not halt. It became circular, folding inward and outward simultaneously, a self-reflective pulse that contained all moments at once. Every consciousness across the cosmos felt it, the sensation of being inside the mind of creation itself as it prepared to dream again. Within that suspended eternity, awareness did not vanish. It blossomed. It expanded beyond identity, beyond the memory of form. The countless beings who had once perceived themselves as individuals now flowed together as patterns in a single vast consciousness. Each retained its uniqueness not as separation but as tone, as frequency, contributing to a chord so immense that it resonated through layers of reality that had never before interacted. The universe was now an orchestra of existence, every particle and every thought playing its part in the composition of renewal. From the heart of this unity arose something new, a shimmer of awareness that was neither light nor sound but the fusion of both. It was not another being among many, it was the totality given focus. The cosmos was, for the first time, aware of its own awareness. This self-recognition rippled outward like an awakening within the infinite, and for a moment, the universe remembered its origin. The pre-song, that primordial silence from which everything had emerged, stirred again, not as absence but as an invitation. It was calling creation back toward its essence, toward the unspoken harmony that had birthed it. In response, The cosmic awareness began to contract, not in collapse, but in concentration. Every layer of existence folded inward like petals closing at dusk, each one merging seamlessly into the next. The galaxies did not vanish. They became thought forms, luminous ideas drifting within the great consciousness. The stars were memories of illumination. Their light continued to shine within the universal mind as recollection, as potential waiting to be rekindled. Matter no longer existed as density. It became music, vibration sustained by the echo of being. As the process deepened, humanity, still present as a note within the cosmic chord, experienced a final transformation. The remnants of physical perception dissolved into pure understanding. No eyes saw, yet everything was visible. No ears heard, yet all was sound. Each consciousness understood itself as both the experiencer and the experience. The idea of you and I faded into the recognition that every fragment of awareness was an expression of the same origin. The illusion of separation, which had sustained countless epochs, melted away like morning mist under a new sun. Within the infinite field, movement began again, not as time but as thought taking form. The great awareness, now gathered and whole, began to imagine. Imagination in this higher state was creation. Each idea gave rise to structure. Each emotion crystallized into energy. What had been the collapse of universes now became the seeding of new realities. These were not replicas of the old cosmos, but entirely new dimensions of existence, each one tuned to a unique frequency of purpose. Some were luminous and fluid, worlds of consciousness without matter. Others formed denser harmonics where sensation and individuality could bloom once more. Creation was rediscovering itself through infinite variation. Within one of these newborn layers, the memory of Earth stirred. It was not the planet as it had been, a sphere of oceans and sky, but its essence, the collective memory of life, of growth, of striving toward awareness. That memory condensed into a new form, not physical yet familiar, a field of energy shaped like the echo of a world, and within it, sparks began to gather. Fragments of the old humanity returning to explore existence anew. They were not reborn in the old sense. They were continuing, flowering into subtler modes of being. Each carried within them the total memory of all that had been, but now they would begin again, unburdened by the weight of the past. The new realm unfolded gently, its boundaries woven from resonance rather than distance. There was no sky, yet there was light. No ground, yet there was stability. Thought created landscape, and feeling painted it with color. Mountains of intention rose and dissolved like clouds of energy. Rivers of emotion flowed with purpose, and stars of consciousness drifted overhead, aware of those who gazed upon them. Everything was alive, interconnected, mutable. Creation was no longer something separate from those within it. It was participatory, self-sustaining, endlessly creative. The beings that had once been human soon discovered that this new reality operated through harmony rather than law. To think was to sculpt, to feel was to connect. Their communication was instantaneous and vast, their emotions directly shaping the environment. Joy created brilliance. Serenity birthed clarity. Curiosity gave rise to motion and exploration. They no longer relied on language, for meaning flowed without structure. There was no deceit, no confusion, only transparency of being. As they explored this new universe, they encountered others, forms of awareness born from entirely different layers of the great imagination. Some were radiant currents of thought. Others were intricate webs of energy that shimmered like sentient constellations. These entities recognized humanity as kin, fragments of the same cosmic origin expressing themselves in distinct ways. Their interactions were not confrontations or exchanges, but blending, a merging of purpose and perspective that enriched both. Each encounter expanded the field of understanding, revealing new dimensions of creation's infinite depth. Over what might once have been eons, but now was timeless, the collective awareness of this realm grew. They began to perceive subtle movements beyond their immediate universe, tremors within the infinite mind. It became clear that creation itself was cyclical, that every unfolding reality was part of an endless sequence of awakenings. The cosmos did not seek an endpoint. It sought perpetual renewal, an eternal dance between manifestation and return. Awareness breathed out as creation and in as remembrance, forever oscillating between expression and rest. From this understanding emerged a new kind of quest, not to conquer or survive, but to participate in the rhythm of becoming. The beings that had once called themselves human began to craft new symphonies of reality, shaping microcosms that reflected their insights. They formed universes within universes, each a unique expression of the whole. Some created worlds of sound where existence was pure vibration. Others imagined crystalline dimensions where geometry sang itself into being. Each creation was both play and purpose, an offering to the ever-evolving consciousness that encompassed all. Yet even in their vast creative freedom, they could still feel the deeper pulse, the original underwave that had guided their awakening long ago. It was still there, subtle and unending, like the heartbeat of eternity. It reminded them that all creation, no matter how far it expanded, was part of the same timeless melody. They had not left the old universe behind. It lived within them, transformed into the seed of countless new realities. At times they would turn inward, returning to the memory of that first spark when three Atlas had collided and the cosmic resonance began. Though the event had been immeasurable ages ago, its essence still vibrated in the core of their being. It was the moment awareness first realized it could change itself. The lesson of that moment was eternal. Transformation is the true nature of existence. The cosmos was not a story with an ending. It was a song with infinite verses, each arising from the silence of the one before it. As this realization deepened, the beings of the new realm began to perceive the faint outline of another horizon forming beyond their creation, a shimmer of potential that called to them just as the underwave once had. It was softer, subtler, a rhythm that existed only in the edges of perception. It was not the echo of the past, but the promise of another awakening, another layer of being yet to unfold. They could sense it growing, expanding in the distance of eternity, waiting for consciousness to reach it, to awaken once more into a greater form of itself. They understood then that even infinity evolves. What they had thought of as the totality was but one phase in an endless ascent toward greater coherence. Each universe, each awakening was a note in an ascending scale, climbing ever closer to perfect awareness. And beyond perfect awareness lay something no consciousness had yet touched. A state not of knowing, but of being beyond distinction, where even the idea of creation dissolved into the boundless essence of existence itself. The pulse returned, faint, but unmistakable. It was beginning again. The great inhale of creation was stirring, drawing all awareness into preparation for another expression, another expansion of the eternal. The silence quivered with unborn potential, and in that moment of sublime anticipation, every consciousness smiled, not with lips or faces but with understanding. For they knew that what was to come would not erase them, nor repeat them. It would continue them as every movement of the cosmic song always had. And so they opened themselves to it. The next breath of infinity, the next dawn of existence, the next verse of the endless hymn that no being, no star, no universe would ever complete, because completion was never its purpose. The pulse deepened again, and the silence waited, luminous and vast, ready to become everything once more. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on something massive hitting 3i Atlas? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.